Night arrives with the soft authority of a librarian closing a book. The day's dust settles out of the air, lanterns find their steady breath, and the great square of the Registan becomes exactly what it was made to be, a quiet room under open sky. You step onto the stone and the ground holds a stored warmth, like a friendly palm. The three madrasas there, façades stitched with blue and gold with geometry that learn patience from the heavens, stand in a long, attentive silence. Nothing hurries. Patterns do the speaking. On your left, Allah Beg's madrasa wears a language of stars. Under those arches, someone once measured angles as calmly as bread is measured for a table. And the city learned that the sky is not a threat but a map. If you listen, the brickwork offers a lesson in integers. The tile repeats it in a softer voice until even your breath starts counting along. Across the square, lions and suns walk the Sherdorf away, not roaring but pacing with the kind discipline of a guard who knows his shift and keeps it. Between them, Telekori carries a dusk of its own, the kind of gold that doesn't shout, that gives the dark a reason to behave. A breeze moves through the portal and you feel a change, as if the square had just opened a window higher than any dome. The smell is faint, warm stone tea, a trace of cardamom. Someone applauded in a distant room. Footfalls pass behind you and fade. Even voices, when they happen, arrive like pages turned carefully. You stand in the center and look up. The real stars are fewer than the tiled ones, and more than enough. The dome lines meet the night the way a cup slip meets water, cleanly, without fuss. You breathe, and the square allows it. Think of time here not as a river but as a courtyard with many doors. One opens onto a class, a teacher tracing numbers in chalk, a student frowning in the sincere way youth frowns when something true is almost within reach. Another opens onto a scribe under a lamp, his reed pen making small, sure decisions. Being pulls where it should, thinly like moonlight on a threshold. Another admits a group of travelers. They take off their shoes and sit. A plate arrives with bread blistered from the tandoor and a scatter of black seeds at the center like a constellation that refuses to forget its name. Stone likes ritual, and the square has its own. A cat patrols the edge, the color of toasted bread. It stops at each column as if counting pillars were a maintenance task only it can do properly. A boy runs 3 steps and stops because the ground itself persuades him to treat it gently. Somewhere a door hinges without complaint. Someone inside decides to tell a story and does it slowly enough that the walls can help. Tea is poured the way questions are asked by good friends, not to test, only to keep company. The air acquires a temperature you could call polite. You begin to notice the small mercies the builders left behind. The way the recessed arch cools the heat and makes a pocket of evening even at noon. The way the glazed tile keeps its color without insisting on it, so that blue is a fact and not a boast. The way the inscriptions curve around the door like an armor on a shoulder, saying, "You may come in, you will not be hurried." There are niches set at human height where a lamp once sat. The soot has long since been forgiven, but the wall remembers the light. A step is worn low exactly where a tired foot would have wanted it worn. Gratitude has a shape. Imagine a class let out long ago. Students spill into the square, then slow, because the space itself does not tolerate clatter. They speak of comets, of trade routes, of whether the letter they copied looks more like a leaf or a wave. One looks up. The dome answers without changing anything. The teacher stands with a colleague and talks about the weather, which is not a small topic here. It is an entire ethics. How to build for heat, how to borrow night, how to let a city sleep well and wake better. The square hears this too, the way a grandparent hears grandchildren laughing in another room and understands that the house is doing its job. Later, a caravan will arrive at the edge of the city, lanterns a little unsteady after so much distance. The horses will be unsaddled under a portico that has kept its shade ready all day. News will spread. Oranges are sweeter this year, paper is cheaper. Someone has a tray of mirrors that show a kinder version of the world. The Registan will not see the bargaining. It is an academic space, an instrument for thinking. But the square will feel the city relax each time a door closes softly on a guest who has been welcomed, and a story that will be told in the morning. There is a clock here, though you can't point to it. It's in the way shadow moves across a column and tells the hour to anyone who knows a column's grammar. It's in the way the minaret far off leans its voice into the air and the sound arrives as if poured. It's in the way the square, because of its shape, teaches you how long to sit before moving, and how far to walk before stopping, and where to stand so that silence does not feel like absence but like attention. You sit on a low step. The stone cools your bones in a way that makes sleep a possibility instead of a concession. Someone sets a small cup by your knee without comment. Steam makes a brief, vertical ghost, and then is memory. The tea tastes like someone decided not to sweeten it, and then changed their mind for your sake. The cup is white and heat, and scent in equal parts. You hold it, and the square agrees that holding is a form of thought. When you leave, you do it the way a reader closes a book they mean to open again soon, hand flat, breath easy. The arch draws the night a little closer as you pass. Outside the portal, a lane keeps its own counsel. Wooden doors, iron rings, a strip of light under one sill where someone is finishing a letter. The Registan remains behind you, awake and effortless, counting nothing, keeping everything. It will keep your place. It has always kept everyone's place. And if, at the edge of sleep, you hear geometry repeating a lesson in a voice as soft as tea steam, that is only the square finishing what it started, teaching you to measure the dark with gentleness, and to step inside it as though it were a room made for rest. Before the streets are fully awake, a low door yields to warm breath. Stone steps lead downward. Air thickens, friendlier with each stair. This is the hammams, or the hour when water remembers its vows and steam learns everyone's names. You enter, and night lets go of your shoulders the way dust lets go of a basin when it is rinsed. A keeper nods. A wooden clack answers from somewhere within. Sandals find the wet shine of old marble. The first room is a pause. Light slips in from a small high window and lands on a bench as if it had been invited to sit. A copper ewer waits, not impatient. Hooks along the wall hold towels the color of milk. Their edges curl with the memory of 100 dawns. Someone lays a palm on the warm slab to test the morning's readiness, then gestures, "This way?" Your breath changes shape to fit the place. Deeper in, the heat gathers like a story nearing its gentle point. The dome above is pierced with starry holes. Steam climbs through them in slow constellations, then returns as a soft rain that never wets the soul of the stone. Sound alters. Footsteps are cotton. Water is velvet. Voices become the inside of pomegranates, rich, muted, sweet. You lie on the gebek tawi, the warm central stone, and the slab introduces itself by taking time out of your back and setting it quietly on the floor. Water arrives in bowls. A dipper lifts, turns, and pours. The arc brightens the light without actually brightening the room. The first splash is a polite shock, the second a promise kept, the third simply correct. Soap appears, a pale olive rectangle that smells of a grove and wine, and a hand makes it into a cloud. The cloud travels your neck, your shoulders, the long map of your spine. Afterwards, the air tastes faintly of green. In a corner, a barber warms his razor on his palm and folds a cloth the way a bird folds a wing. He narrates nothing. His hands keep the grammar. A boy carries buckets as if each were a word in a sentence he does not wish to drop. An old man, eyes closed, sits with his hands resting on his knees and lets water translate him into something easier. Two friends discuss bread in a tone usually kept for politics. The hammam approves their priorities. There is a station where kismets rasp gently across skin, gathering the small gray alphabet of yesterday. The first strokes are skeptical, the next persuasive, the last convinced. What lifts away looks like worry that has changed its mind. The kis pauses at the wrist, considers the work, then writes one more line and retires. A copper bowl chuckles when it is filled. The drain accepts what it is given and keeps no record. Architecture works here as softly as a mother tongue. Dooms keep the heat above while the marble keeps it below. Benches curve to the back's guess at comfort. Niches hold you as at a height a wet hand can find without searching. Light spills from a single oculus and breaks on steam into coins you cannot spend. Every surface has learned to be kind to water and to people who are mostly water. The hammams' music is simple. Drip, pour, sigh, hush. The stone returns a muted echo that reassures rather than impresses. Somewhere a wooden pail taps itself back into round. Somewhere a ladle clinks against copper like a distant, courteous bell. The attendant's sandals keep easy time. You count not numbers, but breaths, and between them the small places where no counting is needed. Stories come here to be rinsed and folded. A merchant recites the exact sequence of markets on a road he will leave tomorrow. As he speaks, the order loses its edge and keeps only its usefulness. A teacher remembers the face of a student who drew letters as if they were flowers. He resolves to praise more, correct more gently. A traveler says nothing at all for a long while, and those gathered consider this an excellent contribution. Steam edits everything down to essentials. After heat, the cool room is an answered letter. Lemon water appears. Mint joins it without fanfare. A basin waits with water that has remembered night. Your skin wakes into a new geography layer, more obedient to the hand. The bench holds you and becomes a sort of compass. North is quiet, south is also quiet. All directions are permitted to be rest. Massage is offered, not insisted on. A palm lays itself along your shoulder blade and asks a simple question. Muscles reply in the affirmative. Circles widen under oil that smells like seed in sun. Joints remember the word open. The spine agrees to become a harbor. When it ends the way a good sentence does, without apology, exactly on time. In the dressing hall, morning light has finally reached the lattice and scattered itself kindly on wood. Towels transform slowly into dry. A small brazier hums without ambition. Tea makes grip-sized glasses fog at the rim. You are returned a little to the world, precisely enough to accept bread with sesame, a bowl of sweet fruit, a handful of almonds that sound like rain when they land in your palm. Someone laughs. Someone answers. The dome above keeps your names. As you leave, the door gives back a breath of cool air as if the street were exhaling to make room for you. Outside, the city has taken on its ordinary colors, improved by washing. Brick looks more like brick, sky more like sky. You note a private note. The way stone underfoot now acknowledges you, a fraction less resistant, a fraction more companion. The sensation lingers longer than you expect. Fabrics whisper more softly when you move. Dust in a beam of light behaves like citizens in a calm square. Noise is quieter by half, and what remains has shape. The hammam has polished the hours. The day reflects them without glare. When night comes, it remembers the steam and arranges itself accordingly. Your breath warms, rises, vanishes through star holes, and returns as a light drizzle on the inside of your thoughts. Worries dissolve to sediment you can pour away. Sleep lies down beside you like a warm slab, solid, even, indisputably gentle. And in the dream that follows, a copper bowl lifts, a small river arcs, and time thoroughly rinsed runs clear. Morning collects itself on the far side of the citadel, where a pool mirrors the day before the day knows its own shape. Along the water's edge, a colonnade stands, slender wooden pillars rising with the calm of trees that finally learn to walk. This is Lyabi-Hauz, a mosque that keeps a small lake for a companion, and a ceiling that has practiced brightness for 100 quiet years. The surface of the house holds the sky. The pillars drink it. You step into the shade, and it answers with a temperature that remembers kindness. Wood carries a perfume of resin and dust and old handprints. Each column tapers from a carved base petals and leaves with a long, disciplined shaft that gathers into a capital like a bouquet someone arranged but never bragged about. Above, the painted ceiling starts modestly, and then blooms lacquered tiles, rosettes, borders that loop and rest and loop again, colors sugared into sheen. It is the sort of brightness that teaches the eye to lower its voice. The pool is part of the architecture, not a neighbor. It keeps the sound of the square edited, turns carts into ripples, turns footsteps into rings that widen and forget to break. Ducks write short cursive on the surface and sign their names with a silver stroke. The mosque watches without moving. A breeze travels over the water and enters the colonnade as if it had been expected. Cool, scented with wet stone, polite. Look closely, and every pillar has a biography in wood grain. One bears the memory of a knot high on its back, long since planed into agreeing with the hand. Another keeps a fade scar where a craftsman changed his mind and made the better choice. At their feet, stone bases hold the weight like old friends. At their crowns, carved muqarnas break the passage from pillar to ceiling into small acts of mercy. Load becomes ornament. Strength becomes delight. Someone arrives with a broom and draws a soft pattern in dust that will vanish when the first worshippers come. A boy fills a brass vessel from the house and walks with both eyes on the surface so as not to spill a version of the sky. An old man takes a beam of shade and sits exactly where it bends, his hands resting on his knees, as if about to accept a gift. Pigeons rehearse the decision to leave and postpone it. The morning keeps its balance. The painted ceiling deserves a long gaze. Squares become stars. Stars open into gardens. Gardens suggest gates that open onto cooler gardens still. The lacquer gives the colors a wet patience. Even when the heat arrives, the blue stays blue, the red stays generous, the gold remains a rumor rather than a shout. If you lie on the low step and look straight up, the world narrows happily. Wood paint, sky, repeat, rest. Call to prayer begins not as a surprise but as completion. Sound lifts from the minaret like water poured from a careful jug, no splash, only widening. The pillars carry it along their length and offer it to the ceiling, which returns it softened. The house keeps a measure of it for later, a reflection you cannot hear but can somehow feel. People step from sun to shade with the modest relief of travelers reaching a porch. Sandals learn to be quiet. The floor cools the day. When prayer ends, speech returns with the right amount of volume. Two friends compare apricots from different stalls and arrive at an agreement that pleases the fruit. A carpenter runs his palm down a column without looking, as if greeting kin. A child counts capitals 1, 2, 3 until the numbers become a rhythm, and the rhythm becomes a game the pillars are happy to host. A woman ties a scarf tighter and watches the water to see how the wind intends to behave. There are details the mosque sets aside for the patient. The lacquer's hairline cracks a map of the ceiling's long, honest life. Catch morning in threads of pale light. A small iron hook tucked into a beam remembers a lantern's weight. A plank along the edge has a shallow dip exactly where 1,000 elbows chose to rest. The stone step's outer corner is rounded to a kindness by generations of feet that preferred the same angle. Nothing here hurries. Everything arrives. At noon, the pillars become taller by refusing to glare. Their shade deepens. The painted roof lowers the sky into reach. A sparrow drops to the pool and drinks twice, each sip leaving a ring that links to the next, and then forgets it. The water shows the ceiling back to itself, a duplicate world that moves more slowly and does not mind being upside down. You feel perhaps for the first time today that your breath has a comfortable weight and is willing to stay. In late afternoon, the colonnade learns gold. Sunlight crosses the pool, climbs the columns in careful bands, and settles under the painted flowers as if it had found the right shelf at last. The air cools by 1 quiet degree. Someone opens a small book and the pages flicker like fish scales. The square beyond starts to thicken with the evening's errands, but the mosque's border keeps clatter in a polite tea. Stories collect here naturally. They say a king once stopped and admired his own reflection until a child laughed, and the king laughed too. After that, the house felt freer to keep everybody's face. They say a painter, short on pigment one summer, crushed pomegranate peel for red, and was so pleased with the result that he never returned to the old recipe. They say carpenters carried the pillars in a procession like trees on holiday, and the trees agreed, for once, to become buildings. Whether true or embroidered, each story fits the grain. When evening arrives, lamps along the gallery show a small, forgiving light. The ceiling, which glowed like fruit at noon, now keeps a hush of embers. The pillars become silhouettes of patience. The pool turns from mirror to ink. Stars, not yet visible in the air, find it first. A last breeze runs a hand over the place and goes on to its next errand. You sit long enough to mistake a minute for an hour and are rewarded for the mistake. Leaving is a reverse ablution. Shade to sun, cool to warm, silence to the friendly grammar of the street. You pass your palm over a column once, without thinking. Wood answers in its language, dry, calm, ready tomorrow. The house keeps your shape a moment longer than seems possible, and then gives it back to the day. The steps down to the square feel easier to count than they were to climb. At night, when sleep sorts your sights and sounds, Bolo-Haze will take a large, gentle portion. Pillars will rise and fall with your breath. Water will hold moonlight the way paper holds ink. A painted star will lower itself into reach and touch your forehead without waking you. You will understand, without needing words, why wood sometimes makes the best roof for sky, and why a pool is a good companion for prayer. The day lifts itself gently over a slope of clay and brick, and a fortress takes its place the way a sentence takes its place at the start of a page. The arc stands on its own hillock, a soft-shouldered geometry of walls that have learned how to hold both sun and shadow. From below, the great gate looks like a pause in a long thought to white towers flanking an arch, a wooden balcony above where morning gathers before it spills into the city. Walk the ramp, and let your feet decide the pace. The bricks underfoot keep an old warmth even at dawn. The wall to your right feels close enough to know your name. Low, regular niches rhythm the ascent. Swallows fold their small wings and tuck themselves into those pockets as if the masonry had grown expressly for them. A cart creaks somewhere, then chooses silence. You pass under the arch, and the arch behaves like a hand opening to show its palm. Courtyards, corridors, a spill of rooms that seem ready to receive anything offered gently. Stories, footsteps, the temperature of a visitor's breath. Inside, the light goes kind. 1 yard holds a patch of swept sand and a slant of shade. Another offers a cool corner where a jar keeps water at the exact honesty the morning asked for. The walls are the color of bread crust in places, of dried apricot in others. Where sun catches a curve, it writes a pale line and leaves it to steep. A wooden door wears iron bosses like old moons. The ring knocks a sound you can feel in your wrist bone, then falls quiet with dignity. A keeper nods. The day is set in motion. In the audience court, stone remembers voices that arrived with their best shoes on. A long E1 frames a rectangle of sky. The painted ceiling above it keeps stamps of blue and red and gold in its quiet ledger. Lean a little, and the echo comes back with a cool edge, polite, precise, interested but never urgent. If you close your eyes, an embassy of lavender and paper and dust speaks in older languages. The page a scribe once held there has forgotten ink but not posture. There are rooms that still hold winter in their walls, and others that learned the grammar of summer. Thick plaster that returns, heat slowly. Small windows that make the sun rehearse before it enters. Floors that hold cool like a well holds water. A narrow passage leads to a balcony. Below, the city turns itself out for the day. Domes like quiet islands, lanes with their shawls of shadow. A market stuttering from hush into hum. The minaret beyond gestures, and the arc answers without moving. Because acknowledgement is also movement if it is done properly. Not far off, a museum room keeps small, telling things. A brass astrolabe that once borrowed the sky for a living. A knife with a handle worn to the size of a particular man's decisions. A bolt of agate whose blur teaches the eye to settle down. coins whose edges have learned politeness from 1,000 pockets. You read their labels and also read the duster on the edges, which has its own queer hand. The glass does not scold. It curates without raising its voice. Walk the upper walk and listen to the wall itself. The crenels make a rhythm. Tooth, gap, between them. The wind invents a vowel the ear understands is cool. The parapet shows you the city in senses square, courtyard, roof, each ending with a soft period of tree. A guard once paced here and learned to measure the day in swallows and shadows. His task has passed into the bricks like a good habit. Your feet rehearse his steps without being asked. The arc keeps a long memory of weather. In rain, its surface is silver and take the sky's mood. In heat, they turn to patience and train light to be courteous. Today, a soft breeze travels the corridors and finds the courtyard where a mulberry throws a quiet shade. You sit on a low stone, and the hours feel like coins you can spend without thinking. You will not run out. The house is generous. A boy crosses with a bucket, careful as a priest. The water answers the bucket with a single bright note, and then goes to work cooling what needs cooling. Stories attach themselves to these walls because walls accept stories the way bowls accept water. They say messengers once rattled up the ramp with tidings hot as iron. They say a poet recited under an arch, and the air kept the last line for years. They say a storm from the steppe leaned against the gate all night and found it more stubborn than itself. The two adversaries trading compliments they would never admit. You are not asked to adjudicate. The wall will keep any tale that knows how to behave. In a room that faces inward, a wooden pillar shows the polite shine that only hands can give. Fingers, rings, the heel of a palm. Centuries of greetings have turned the grain into a river. On the floor, a low area of brick is bowed where sandals have paused, as though the ark has practiced nodding. A small hearth holds cold ash. The ash holds the memory of tea. If a speaker set a cup there once and forgot it, the room has forgiven the lapse. Noon draws the fortress tighter. Shade gathers its skirts and steps closer to the walls. The smell of lime warms, chalk and sun making a sentence together. A sparrow finds the courage to bathe in a shallow tray. It lifts and shakes and writes drips across dust. The sound of the city comes up in a mild swell. Market, mallet, mule then recedes like easy tide. You stand in a doorway and count not minutes but swallows. Their arc stitch the sky to the wall so neatly that only the eye can find the scene. Toward afternoon, the arc gives its best lesson, that height can be humble. From the street, it is authority. From within, it is service rooms offered to light, thresholds offered to steps, parapets offered to the task of looking out with care. Even the great gate does not brag. It accommodates. A woman with a basket adjusts her scarf and passes under as if she had always owned the arch, which in the most important sense she has. The fortress and the city have signed a treaty no one needs to read. You keep us. We keep you. Shadows lengthen into explanations. The rat begins to write its slow diagonal across the outer wall. A man sits with his back to brick and looks at nothing. This is work too. Somewhere, a key turns and the sound is both small and complete. Swifts return to the high air. The balcony above the gate learns gold for 10 precise minutes. The arc holds still so the light can find its mark. Pigeons applaud without meaning to. When evening finally takes the hill, the fortress exhales the day it has kept. Lamps prickle along the parapet. The audience court keeps a last piece of blue like a coin saved for later. The city below answers with its own constellations, doorways, tea-house windows, its child's lantern swinging. The wind comes cooler now and carries the soft lime scent down the ramp into the sleeping streets. Leaving feels like finishing a paragraph correctly. You descend the ramp, and the wall stays at your shoulder like an old friend who knows when to be companion and when to be landmark. At the arch, you pass into the lane and the lane accepts you. The arc remains where it has always been, watching not for danger only but for rhythm, making sure day yields properly to night, and that night returns the favor. It is a keeper of pace. When sleep seeks a shape later, it may borrow these walls. It will keep its own parapet, and let worries walk there until they tire. It will build a little audience court where memory can speak softly and be heard. It will tuck a small square shade into the corner for your breath to sit in. It will open a gate just wide enough for rest to pass. And it will hold still, as the ark has held still, until morning arrives and asks politely to come in. Morning chooses the old orchard first. Between mulberries and quiet grass, a small, perfect building waits the way a thought waits at the back of the mind, present, patient, undecorated except by certainty. The Samanid Mausoleum does not announce itself. It simply is. A near cube of baked brick, a low dome that sits like a gentle hand for faces alike so that each side can be a front without envying the others. You approach across a path of dust that has learned restraint. Up close, the brick begins to speak. Each course is laid with decisions the eye can read, but the tongue hesitates to name. Herringbone here, basket weave there, little lattices that drink the sun and then pour it back as shade. No glaze, no paint, no gold leaf, only clay that met fire and learned polish from time. Where light touches, it softens. Where shadow gathers, it behaves. The wall becomes a slow conversation between day and cool. Step under the arch, and the air changes key. It is not colder, it is clearer. The interior is modest and exact, a square that understands circles, a dome whose ribs persuade your breath to round its corners. Small apertures set so that light arrives as coins, not floods. Dust floats in disciplined columns, and then stops floating because even dust prefers decorum here. A sparrow tries the threshold, approves, and writes a single arc that makes no sound. Listen long enough and the geometry teaches your shoulders to lower. The brick's small perforations, each one a planned kindness, let the outside filter in as pattern rather than glare. The dome's curve returns a whisper with a thin silver edge. If you test it with the word peace, it returns the word improved. On the floor, the cool radiates upward in a soft tide until your feet decide to be guests instead of boots. You stand still and find stillness correctly proportioned. There are very old manners in these walls. They were made when baked brick was a new language in this place, when men learned how to stack earth so it would keep its promises through winter and heat, conquest and quiet. Nothing here brags, but everything remembers. Look along a corner, and you find a seam as clean as a held breath. Press a palm flat to the wall and you can almost hear the kiln's last sigh saved in the clay outside. The orchard goes about its business, fruit thickening under leaves that look like small, good hands. A woman walking the shade line with a basket. Two boys arguing with elaborate politeness over whose turn it is to carry water. The mausoleum accepts their motions and offers steadiness back. Its shadow is short now, then longer, then long. It does nothing else, and yet somehow does a great deal. A city has leaned on less details gathered for those who are slowly. A brick turned on its edge to catch a sliver of light and make it linger. A pierced offrit in the parapet that teaches when to speak softly. A shallow step so even tired knees feel welcome to kneel. On the dome's drum, a simple band of alternating patterns reads like a sentence that says what senses rarely manage. Enough. From a certain angle, the whole seems to hover. From another, it is rooted to the center of the world. Both are true for as long as you're willing to be gentle. People bring their own inventories of quiet here. A traveler sets down a breath he has been carrying since a mountain pass and forgets to pick it up again. A grandmother ties a ribbon to a low branch and lets the knot stand for a name. A student traces the brickwork with a fingertip, as if learning an alphabet no school teaches, but every R uses. No one speaks much. Even the birds keep their punctuation to commas. If you walk around the outside, each face repeats itself differently, the way a refrain learns new meaning in a poem. Corner pilasters rise with modesty. Blind arches hold space for thought. A small string course persuades the eye to pause before climbing. You start to notice the depth of the apertures, how they carve shade into tidy shells, how at noon they shine like little wells of brightness, how toward evening they become eyes that do not judge. Sit on the low platform and let time fold. The dome above has weathered centuries of speaking softly to the sky. It has learned to keep counsel. The brick has exhaled and inhaled 1,000 days. It has a good memory for weather and for footsteps. In such company, your own hours begin to behave. Stories of kings and traders shrink to their correct size. What remains large is the agreement the bricks made with light. We will host. You will visit. Together we will teach Kong. Some say this is one of the oldest survivors of its kind. Others say that kind names are less important than kind work. Either way, the building proves a thesis all by itself, that beauty can be the side effect of precision, that devotion likes honest materials, that permanence is often quiet. It has seen the city change colors and costumes. It has accepted each new century the way a good elder accepts a child's new game with interest, and a steady lap. As evening leans into the orchard, the mausoleum's face turns honeyed. The perforations glow like captured bees at rest. A breeze travels along the brick and cools its own hands. A man passing sets a small cup on the platform and looks up without asking for any answers in particular. The dome, being polite, does not offer any it has not been given. The boys with water return, not quite done with their debate, but closer to its end. The woman's basket is full and patient. Leaving here, you carry fewer edges. Your steps take the mausoleum's measure with them. Square for standing, circle for breathing, small apertures for letting the world in the right amount. The orchard path receives you, dust rises and settles without complaint, and the trees keep their green quiet. When you glance back, the little monument has not moved, but you feel as if it has walked you a pace toward yourself. Later, when sleep begins its careful work, this room of brick and air will volunteer as a model. Your thoughts will stack into calm courses. Light will arrive in coins rather than floods. Breath will curve to meet a low dome only it can see. You will remember how cool felt underfoot and how sound returned improved. And you will wake with the sense that permanence, when it is honest, is simply patience that has learned to be kind. Evening loosens the day's grip and leads you toward a courtyard that keeps its own weather. The portal is tall and patient muqarnas like small, careful caves of light. Bands of inscription that know exactly when to turn a corner tile the shade of dusk stored in clay. Beyond, the dome rises plum blue, ribbed like a lantern fruit, flecked with stars that learn to stay. Gur-e Amir, the tomb of the commander, does not insist. It breathes. You answer by breathing to step under the arch, and the courtyard edits the air. The stone is cooler, the sound rounder. A pomegranate tree leans across a strip of sky. Its leaves write tiny commas in the breeze. The dome, higher than your first guess, keeps stillness in stock. Swifts circle and are counted without being named. A caretaker crosses quietly with a brass key that knows this lock better than speech knows what it means. Inside, the light is the color of soft honey. The walls lift patterns upon patterns, turquoise glazing into teal, indigo into night, gold leaf held back just enough to teach restraint. The eye moves, then rests, then moves again, discovering kindnesses in corners, a thin border of white tile like a thread of milk. A recette that pretends to be simple the way a lullaby pretends. Below, carved cenotaphs keep company, stone markers of names the city already knows by heart. Stand still and listen to the room, calibrate your breath. The dome above is a bowl turned over the world. Its inner skin holds petals, stars, geometry that wants only to be even. A whisper rises and returns dressed slightly better than when it left you. Footsteps relocate themselves 1 degree softer. A lamp somewhere holds a little flame with the seriousness of a good child. Time remembers how to fall in single grains. You notice the green stone where legend sits dark, smooth, a slab that looks like night made tangible. Stories say it is jade from far mountains, brought along a road that remembered every hoof and wheel. Others say the color is a lesson rather than a fact. History keeps its ledger. The room keeps its gift, the sense that power finally desired quiet. The stone absorbs eyes without greed and gives them back less burdened. Look along the lower walls and find the tiles close work honeycomb of interlaced stars, lines that nod to one another at humane intervals, a feathering where blue agrees to share its edge with white, where a crack travels the glaze. It does not scold. It teaches the sentence of time: begin, continue, continue, bless. A caretaker's small brush spends a minute coaxing dust from a letter. The letter thanks him by becoming itself again. If you step to the side aisle, a window lattice reveals the courtyard in patient pieces: leaf, sky, brick, dome. Repeat, rest. The outside world comes in as portions you can carry. A child, lifted briefly by a hand, peers through and forgets to speak. The lattice returns the favor by forgetting to cast hard shadows. In one corner, a niche remembers a lamp. Soot above it tells the oldest true story ink knows. The mausoleum gives height a humble job. It lifts not to impress but to settle, not to tar but to cradle the room into balance. Your shoulders lower by a brick's breadth. Your thought arranges itself into squares and circles, starbursts where worry dissolves into arithmetic the heart can do. A prayer yours or someone else's lies down and stretches without needing a reason. Outside again, the dome has learned gold from the last light. Ribs take color like fruit ripening for 10 minutes, and no more. The portal throws a rectangle of shade long enough for 3 people and a memory. The pomegranate leaves clap once and call it done. In the lane beyond the gate, a small boar rolls a wheel rim with a stick. The sound arrives as a polite reminder that life has every right to continue nearby. Stories lean gently against the brick. They say that power once learned here that it was not the last word. They say a scholar stood in this doorway, forgot his argument, and remembered his teacher. They say a traveler folded both hands inside his sleeves and made peace with the next smile. Whether embroidered or plain, every tale finds a shelf that fits. Dusk deepens. The dome becomes silhouette and idea. The courtyard stones release the day's heat like coins counted back into a hand. A kite of bats takes the high air. Somewhere just out of sight, a kettle makes a small decision in favor of boiling. The caretaker draws the door as one draws a curtain. No hurry, no fuss. Only the correct pressure at the correct hinge. The room keeps all it needs to keep. You walk away the way a reader closes a page they mean to reopen. Flat palm, quiet promise. The street takes you. The sky opens one more shade of blue. Behind you, the dome stays, a lantern you can't see that still manages to light your pace. What you carry is not a monument. It is a measure. How tall to stand without pride. How softly to speak without shrinking. How to let a room teach your lungs their best work. Later, when sleep arranges your hours, it will borrow this geometry. A ribbed vault will curve over your thoughts and keep them inside kindness. Green stone will cool your forehead from a distance. Patterns will repeat it until they persuade rest to continue without supervision. You'll breathe once for the portal, once for the dome, once for the quiet between, and the night will complete the prayer for you. The street narrows until it becomes almost a thought, and then a small gate opens onto a yard that keeps its voice low. Therefore towers rise like friendly listeners, shorter than minarets, rounder than arguments, each capped with a blue that borrowed sky and decided to keep a little. Chor Minor, for minors, for companions, does not try to be grand. It tries, successfully, to be exactly enough. The courtyard has learned how to host. A brick path crosses a neat patch of earth. A mulberry drops slow commas on the ground. A cat considers the shade under a bench and approves. The building rests in the middle with the calm of a table set before guests arrive. It's for turrets where turquoise caps stitched with pale patterns, threads of tile that read like soft handwriting from far away. Between them, a small central body, simple as a cup, ties the shapes into a sentence. You step closer and brick begins to speak in its quiet grammar. Courses wrap around the towers like armbands. Shallow niches keep a stock of shade. A door, modest and correct, remembers hands in the height of its iron ring. The blue caps are not the same blue. One tilts toward green after rain. One learns dusk sooner. One holds a paler sky. One keeps a deeper one, the kind of sibling difference that makes a family believable. A swallow lands on the rim of a cap, inspects the neighborhood, and writes a short dash back into the air. Stories like to visit places that seem to be listening. They say each cap remembers a corner of the world, India, Persia's steppe, local earth. They say a merchant built this not as a boast but as a gratitude, a pocket full of mementos turned into stone. The scholars are gentler. A gatehouse of a madrasa long gone, a place where students once passed into lessons and returned onto sunlight. Brick keeps all versions. Blue keeps all skies. Inside, the rooms are nearer to human scale than most sacred spaces dare to be. A small hall holds a square of air that feels domesticated. A low arch suggests a hand on the head rather than a command. Light comes in the correct amounts, portioned through small openings that behave like careful cooks, enough to see, not enough to glare. Echo is present but shy. If you cough, the room answers with a hum that forgives the interruption. A ladder wood polished to the color of tea climbs into one of the towers. From the landing, a window looks out in tidy fragments, dome, branch, tile, lane. The four caps now lean like friends posing for a picture nobody will frame but everyone will remember. You could count the bricks and run out of numbers before you ran out of calm. A breeze passes over the blue and returns carrying a scent you can't quite name. Dust, sun, a promise of bread from a street you cannot see. Back in the yard, a woman sells small things with large patience. Postcards that still smell faintly of the shop where they slept. Bracelets like armfuls of afternoon, a handful of old coins that have learned to be modest. She speaks in sums that do not require bargaining to be companionable. A smile adjusts the change where arithmetic would be too sharp. A kettle thinks about boiling. Someone lifts a cup and catches a square of sky inside it by accident. No one apologizes for this. Stand with your back to the wall and let time walk past at the speed of sandals. A child counts the towers 4 times and then changes the order to see if the number will change. It refuses. A thin dog makes a perfect circle and sleeps inside it. Pigeons edit the silence into smaller silences. The blue caps keep their watch without being officious. The place understands that looking human-sized is not the same as thinking small. Details gather for the faithful observer. The tile at the cap's edge has a pattern of little teeth that hold light the way a careful hand holds a thread. A hairline crack travels down a turret like a river you can cross at any point. The brick has learned to live with it the way the body learns to live with a favorite scar. An itch keeps a whisper of soot where a lamp once kept its station. The threshold stone dips where feet have voted for the same line across decades. Noon teaches the caps how to shine without shouting. Blue turns to enamel, brick to bread. The shadows of the 4 towers draw themselves longer and, for a minute, touch hands on the ground. The city beyond continues its large projects, markets, courtyards, roads that behave like censuses with many clauses, but the yard keeps a thesis the heart prefers, for quiet shapes are enough to hold a day in balance. Toward late afternoon, the air cools by a courteous degree. The caps learn a new blue plum at the edges, rain in the middle, a coin of bright at the crown. A bicycle slips along the lane like a question that already knows its answer. A traveler leans against the wall, counts backward from whatever number a day requires, and arrives at 1 with no sense of loss. Chor Minor has the gift of returning people to a more accurate size. The building is not a clock, but it knows hours. It holds morning as promise, noon as fact, evening as permission. It proves that 4 can be a circle of the spaces between our kind. It proves that turquoise can domesticate sky. It proves that brick, when asked politely by good hands, can grow into companionship. You do not leave improved. You leave a line. When lamp time comes, a thin gold gathers along the cap's stitches, as if the blue were reading by a small light. The yard learns hush without trying. A final swallow writes the day's last dash, and closes the sentence. A door says see you in the language of iron settling. The cat opens one eye, edits nothing, and sleeps again. You step back into the lane, and the lane receives you with correct manners. Over your shoulder the four caps rise a little above the roofs like a word repeated until it becomes music. Later, when sleep asks what shape it should take, offer it this: a yard with brick paths. A modest yard for friendly towers wearing different versions of evening. A kettle that chooses to boil at the exact right time. Your breath will count to 4, and again, until numbers become rest. Wind lifts along the old hill where the first Samarkand once stood, and the grass leans in one direction as if listening. Afrasiab, ancient earth written over by centuries, keeps its voice low in the open air, but inside a quiet room nearby, color waits with excellent manners. Fragments of wall, rescued from time's long appetite, hold boats, birds, crowns, and sleeves. A procession crosses 10 centuries without hurrying. The pigments keep their hush and still manage to speak. You enter the gallery the way someone opens a letter with a bone knife, carefully, grateful for the small tool that makes gentleness possible. The light is tempered, the air balanced. The walls hold panels like calm windows onto a river you cannot hear. Blues that remember lapis, reds warm as cooked brick, greens that learn patience from copper, whites as soft as ground shell. The plaster is not whole, but the story is patched by your imagination, encouraged by line and gesture. One panel keeps a boat mid-journey, a hull like a smile, oars that have found the correct angle, passengers whose robes fletch the air in quiet pleats. Another portion offers a prince or envoy head slightly inclined, hands composed, a hat that has a mind of its own. Birds occupy margins the way good witnesses do present, unafraid, given a branch of cloud to sit on. A ribbon of waves runs along the bottom. Repeat, rest, repeat. You find yourself breathing in that cadence. The paint surface is a geography of time. Where a crack runs, it behaves like a river the season has narrowed. Where plaster is missing, the gap is a lake the mind crosses without getting wet. The colors are not loud. They have learned indoor voices. Yet they carry. A sleeve curls, and you can feel the wrist beneath. A sash turns a corner, and you understand how the body moved inside it. Someone who knew hands and cloth put them here and left, confident the wall would keep the lesson. The room has the good manners of a library. Footsteps show their papers at the door and whisper once inside. A guard sits with a patience the paintings appreciate. A child points at a crane and gives it a new name. Nobody corrects her. Cranes are generous birds. A note on the wall offers dates and words like Sogdian and ambassadors. The pigments offer a smaller, older truth. People welcomed one another with care, carried gifts, set boats into water that had somewhere to go. The past is not a parade. It is a set of gestures. Lean closer and you'll see the order inside the grace. Outlines draw with a reed's decisiveness. Fill follows, never quite touching the edge, leaving a thread of breath that keeps forms from swallowing one another. The brush must have been obedient without losing its personality. In a corner of sky, a patch of blue shows the tooth of the plaster grain under gloss, humility under robe. A tiny drop of red breaks ranks and travels outside its boundary. The wall has forgiven it, and so should you. It helps to bring a quiet errand. Decide to find 3 stillnesses and 3 motions. Stillness, an eye that looks past you without ignoring you. A knot that keeps its pattern, but doesn't strangle the cloth. A little palm held palm up, not asking, just presenting a fig or a thought. Motion, a ham learning air. A bird discovering the space between 2 beats of its wing. A wave that prefers to repeat itself because repeating is partly resting. The room rewards tasks that aren't tasks. From time to time, Another visitor arrives, and the paintings adjust their tempo by half a degree. Two friends read the labels aloud to one another, but quietly, like people practicing a language before a window that is also a mirror. A student stands longer than comfort and leaves with a sliver of blue lodged in the mind permanently. A grandmother tilts her head and whispers, "I remember a scarf like that," and the century between her and the wall unknots itself for a moment and becomes thread. You think of the hill outside, the wind that has never learned to stop, the grass that archives footsteps imperfectly. Beneath that slope lie houses you cannot visit, ovens that loaned heat to mornings that are now dust, courtyards that kept pomegranates. The murals are a reply to all that gone us. We were here, and we knew how to arrange color round breath. We knew how to let sleeves speak. We guessed you would be tired today and left you this river to look at. Rest on the bench and choose one square of plaster to keep you company. Let it be a corner of robe and a suggestion of ankle, or a reed in a boat's stern or the tip of a wing. Watch how little it needs to remain itself. The mind supplies the rest gladly. It is relieved to be trusted with completion. Somewhere a page turns in a guidebook. Somewhere the air conditioning sighs. Somewhere a pencil writes a date and a name. The painting, having survived harder weathers than a pencil, continues to float. Conservation whispers through the room like a second script. Edges are consolidated, flakes persuaded, salts discussed. The white gloves of the restorer move with the solemn playfulness of a cat in high grass, serious, but delighted to be serious. You are grateful for all the verbs in their work that don't draw attention. To wick, to tap, to seat, to test. Gentle verbs for a wall that rewards gentleness. When you stand to leave, you practice one of the painted gestures, perhaps the small inclination of a head that says both yes and thank you. The figures on the wall return it without breaking character. In the corridor, a window gives the sky back its full volume. You take a breath the size of the hill. The wind that met you earlier is still busy, but you have learned the trick of walking with a mural's pace. Back outside, Afrasiab is again a fold of earth and light. A lark writes rapid cursive above the grass. A butterfly argues lightly with a clover. The city proper hums beyond, its domes and markets and schools in the present tense. You have carried a sheet of the old grammar out with you. How to let color wait, how to cross a river without getting wet, how to see a story that survived by not insisting. Tonight, when sleep asked for a picture, offer it a small fragment, a boat moving on a painted wave, a sleeve curving like a comma, the blue that declined to be loud and therefore lasted. Your breath will find the undercurrent the painters left for you, a line that repeats and rests, repeats and rests, until the room goes dark, and the river you cannot hear carries you gently past the banks you do not need to know by name. Afternoon tilts over Samarkand and finds its favorite roof. Under the wide awnings and brick vaults of Siab Bazaar, the day slows into its most companionable self. Light arrives in generous sheets, then breaks into coins on copper trays, then softens again where pyramid stacks of melons shade the floor. The market is awake without being loud. It speaks in voices the color of tea. The first thing that greets you is bread, the round loaves called naan, stacked like small suns cooling on their own horizons. Each carries a pressed star at the center, a neat constellation of straw comb, and stamp that says this is not merely food. This is a sentence well formed. A baker lifts a hot circle from a wood tray. Steam places a hand on your cheek and leaves the warmth there politely. The crust holds yesterday's fire. The crumb holds today's patience. A child reaches, then remembers manners, then is offered a piece anyway. The market likes to be right about children. Spices keep their gentle dunes along the alleys, cumin like toasted dusk, coriander like a whisper of gardens, dried rose a reticent pink the nose can read. A seller pinches saffron threads between two fingers, as if weighing sunlight. The filaments flash and vanish into a paper twist. Nearby, apricots some dried to coins the color of late afternoon, some fresh and freckle-dressed in shallow bowls that have made peace with sweetness. Walnuts wait with their good gravity. Figs fold their own shadows neatly. In the melon lane, the ear changes key. Dahlia, torpedo, honeydew, ovals and ellipses under straw mats that half remember the field. A man thumps, ear tilted as if listening to a distant drum. The sound answers ripe or not yet. A woman chooses by scent alone and smiles when the knife proves her right. Pale slices go to paper, paper goes to palm, palm goes to mouth. The sun steps into the taste for a second, then out again. The hour learns manners. Copper keeps its glow under a shade that knows how much to permit. Ladles, bowls, ewers, tea trays, thin hammered circles that rephrase the light into quieter forms. A brass scale pens like small moon's tips, writes itself, tips again, settling on a number everyone trusts. The weight is honest. So is the haggling. Prices move the way leaves move, not far, not rudely guided by whether both parties can feel. Cloth cools dye after color. Bolts of ikat cascade in river gradients, smoke to cream, lapis to milk, ember to ash, ripples paused mid-current. A hand lifts the selvage and the pattern runs like a remembered tune. A woman checks against her sleeve, not for match but for conversation. The cloth agrees. Farther on, a row of skullcaps forms a gentle mountain range, indigo peaks stitched with white vines that pretend to climb and decide they live here instead. Food speaks in the grammar of triangles and circles. Samsa triangles, blistered gold, from a tandoor's hot mouth lean and drifts on a blue plate. A vendor cracks one open. Steam carries wine and onion into the air like small news. Plover arrives from a cauldron deep, as a quiet well rice glistening with carat coins and a memory of cumin. The ladle rasps the pot's edge with the sound of a page turned carefully. Vinegar, onion, and tea provide punctuation. Voices layer without quarreling. Uzbek, Tajik, Russian, the soft international of pointing and smiling. Sellers call not with tricks but with recipes. For tea, for pilaf, for winter. Buyers answer with stories of guests coming, grandchildren visiting, a journey tomorrow that requires nuts that do not disappoint, and bread that will still be bread the day after. A cat, efficient and unconcerned with history, patrols the fish row and receives a private tithe. You learn to walk the market the way you walk a paragraph, not too fast, noticing commas, letting the sense accumulate. A stall of raisins, black, red, amber, asks for a pause. A bench of knives, steel gleaming like careful water, asks for respect. A small table of soaps, olive, laurel, apricot kernel, asks for nothing and gives its queen anyway. Dust floats in the high light and minds its tone. A clock somewhere does its modest duty. Nobody consults it. It is enough to know that the hour is decent and well. There are kindnesses stored at hand height. A clay bowl of salt near the bread so you can make the correct small gesture with your pinch. A jug of water that knows how to be offered and refused without embarrassment. A stool that asks for 1 minute of your weight and gives to back. A packet of seeds slipped into your bundle because you admired a cucumber too well to leave without a future. You step into a lane where colors decide to be apples and pomegranates and tomatoes. Peeled garlic keeps its lily pale. Chilies keep their theater red. Cucumbers line up like green commas. The vendor with the finest herbs does not raise his voice. He sets dill in a small fan and mint in a quiet heap and lets the air do the rest. You buy a knot of parsley because the knot is honest and your pocket smells better with it. At the edge of the roofed halls, the sun resumes its full citizenship. Potters stand by blue and white bowls where fish and flowers chase each other in amiable circles. The glaze holds a shallow piece of sky for every pattern. When you tilt the rim, the day tilts with it. A young man turns a wheel with his foot. Clay rises under his hands, as if recognizing a name. Across from him, a woman paints a leaf that doesn't need veins to live. Her brush breathes indigo and lifts. There are stories the market tells without witnesses. A coin dropped and found years later under a plank. a ring that fell into a bag of almonds, and was married there, a recipe written on the back of a receipt, smudged and improved by oil. You feel the floors hold these in a ledger that is never balanced and never needs to be. The columns keep their shades steady and their gossip to themselves. Afternoon lengthens and voice becomes shadow in agreeable portions. Tea is poured, the small glasses fog first, then clear like good thinking. A baker sends a last tray of bread out into a lane, and the loaves click against each other with a sound like polite applause. Somewhere, a radio thinks about music and chooses a melody like a slow river. It travels the distances between stalls and decides to stay. If you sit a minute on the low wall near the melon stall, the market reveals its method: repetition as kindness, variety as mercy, measure as grace. People make room for each other without comment. A hand rests on a shoulder, not to move it but to steady both. A broom writes its circles around a lemon that rolled exactly where it needed to be and will be set back gently. They are slants to gold. When you carry things away, they behave like their places. Bread keeps the warmth of a sentence finished correctly. Tea keeps a promise of steam that arrives again in your own kitchen. Saffron keeps its silent lightning. A bowl keeps a thin echo of the market's clatter. When you set fruit in it at home, the sound of the table will be slightly improved. Your pockets carry weight. Your steps do not. On your way out, you pass a final stall of small sweets, halva cut into neat grammars, sesame brittle that knows about sunlight, raisins that look like afternoons. You accept a piece you did not ask for. The gift dissolves without requesting attention. It is the market's way of signing your receipt with a blessing instead of ink. Evening takes the edges off light. The domes of the trading halls blush. The cobbles cool. Sellers pull cloths over their goods with a tenderness that would make a stranger think these were toys sleeping. Cats inventory the lanes and mark them closed. A last loaf finds its owner. The market exhales once deeply and folds its day like a shawl. Later, when sleep opens its stall in your mind, it sets out the same goods in a quieter order: a round of bread, a crescent of melon, a spoon of amber tea, 3 coins, a thin packet of spice the color of the setting sky. Voices become murmurs that belong to no one, and therefore to everyone. Your breath arranges itself like stacks on a table, warm, even, ready. And just before the dream chooses its route, a pressed star of bread appears and holds the moon for you the way a good market holds a city, steadily, without hurry enough. When the heat loosens its knot and the courtyards begin to speak more softly, a cloth comes out of its chest and the room remembers how to be patient. Suzani garden sewn into fabric, blessing made visible, waits across a woman's knees, silk threads keeping their quiet shine. A lamp is trimmed. The needle finds its first path of the evening. The house lowers its voice so stitches can be heard thinking. The ground is cotton, cool to the hand. The design is older than any one set of fingers. Pomegranates that refuse to stop at one season. Suns that keep a personal down. Tulips that learned their posture from small flames. Outlines lightly drawn in charcoal offer suggestions, not orders. Silk skeins, the colors of fruit and late sky, rest in a shallow bowl. Carmine like a cut fig, saffron like afternoon, indigo like the hour between lamp and star, leaf green like a prayer that chose to be modest. The first stitch is not dramatic. Basma, the long satin stroke that lays a road of shine, crosses a petal and persuades the cloth to remember it. Yerma, the soft, couched line, holds a border in a calm embrace. Iroquois, a chain that understands both strength and grace, encircles a sun and makes it certain. Names are not required. The hand already knows the grammar. Thread enters, rests, returns, rests. The fabric receives the story without interrupting. On the frame, evening gathers its friendly company. In one corner, a kettle makes the low decision to boil. A child, almost asleep, pretends to count pomegranates and loses the number gladly. A neighbor leans in at the threshold with a question about a leaf's curve. The answer is a shared strand of green and a laugh that belongs to nobody and to everyone. Farther back in the room, a grandfather hums a line of sheshmakim the way a loom might hum if it learned a melody. Sometimes the cloth is worked in pieces, sisters to be joined later, a round center where a son may keep court, for corners that teach vines to move politely along edges, wide borders that invite the eye to travel without losing its way. The seams, when they meet, become friendships. A little offset mistake stays, because perfection is a visitor who does not know all the names. The cloth prefers residence. Look closely and color behaves like weather. A red that was fierce under known light becomes plum at dusk. Blue keeps its promises, but keeps them softer. Green holds a conversation with shadow and wins by agreeing. Where two threads overlay, a third shade appears unwritten, unscheduled, a gift stitched by coincidence. The needle pauses there a moment, as if thanking both roots for making room. Stories are stored in this fabric with more reliability than in talk. A bride's dowry learns patience under a mother's thumbs, and pomegranates become a ledger of days, one fruit for the afternoon when the city cooled, one for the cousin's letter, one for the joke about a rooster who learned the time wrong. A cloth for a newborn borrows more leaf than sun, as if to promise shade. A cover for a traveling chest stitches small birds that point in opposite directions and still get along outside. The lane edits itself into quieter senses. Sandal on dust, will on cobble. The evening call spread thinly across roofs. Inside, the needle's bright point becomes a metronome for breath. Hands move with a courtesy that would please any instrument maker. No tug that snubs the cloth, no haste that scolds the thread. From time to time, the embroiderer lifts the work and listens with her eyes. Does the leaf need more shadow? Does the vine know where to turn? Has the flower remembered to be flower and not emblem? The answers come from the cloth itself, which has been keeping careful notes. Suzani prefers good talk to silence, but it likes the right talk. Recipes for winter peaches. The rumor that the melon man has earned a new thumb. The memory of a teacher who never let a mistake go unpraised. The map to a spring outside the gate where water tastes faintly of iron and reassurance. Grief may sit here too, but it loses its sharp corners on the frame. Thread makes it into a border, and the border keeps it from wandering. Patterns are both anchor and invitation. The sunset steadies the center. The vines negotiate the edges. The tulips stand like attentive listeners along the way. Between them travel small inventions. A curving pod that was never in any book, a leaf that chooses to be two-toned, a bird with an extra feather in its tail for luck. A neat ground of seed stitches fills what would otherwise be ladder. The cloth understands that quiet is a color. From time to time, a younger hand takes the needle. The older hand stays near, not instructing, only inhabiting the air where mistakes become cousins to intention. The lesson is not only how to lay silk, it is how to lay patience in small, repeatable units until a day agrees to be kind. When the thread snarls, the loop is loosened with breath first, fingers second. When the needle pricks, a thumb presses and the pain is put away without drama. The cloth remembers both. Tiny spots and hidden knots make a history nobody needs to read to be grateful for. On the wall, finished pieces hang like quiet weather. One is small, fastened with castles, a pocket garden for a room that needed green. Another is wide enough to lay over a bed, and the room glows under it the way a field glows under the first good rain. A third has edges softened by years of washing, and edges mended in 3 colors by 3 different relatives. It is not perfect and therefore dear. Guests sit beneath these with better posture without noticing. The lamp makes a small lake of light on the cloth. Fish of silk swim through it unhurried. The kettle is poured. Sugar dissolves. Mint says its piece and stays behind a while. The thread's color runs a shade brighter when it is wet by accident, and then dries into its old self, as if having learned something useful. A strand ends. It is fastened to the back with decisions the front will never betray. A new strand begins. The needle resumes its measured walk. Night comes in from the garden with the temperature of forgiveness. The suzani folds upon itself once, twice. and keeps its light on the inside for later. Needles find their felt. Silk returns to its bowl like water poured back into a friendly jar. The room is tiddied by gestures that have recall in the fingers, a cloth folded like a letter, a cushion plumped like a promise. The door says yes in wood. Outside, the lane keeps a last footstep for luck. Sleep will borrow this pattern. It will lay a reset at the mind's center and wind vines along the edges to keep stray thoughts from walking away. It will scatter seed stitches over the empty patches and make them restful fields. It will set tulips and pomegranates at intervals suited to breathing. Inhale for leaf, exhale for fruit. In the small hours, if you turn, the cloth in your memory will turn with you, and the needle will take one more quiet bite of the night and then rest. In the morning, the suzani will open again like a calm book. New light will prove yesterday's colors honest. The thread that ended will be hard to find on the front, which is the point of that kind of work. Someone will sit where someone sat, and the garden will grow the width of one more leaf, the length of one more sigh. And somewhere far away, market, caravan, classroom, a person who slept under such a cloud of flowers will feel equal to the day without knowing why. Night comes softly to the two old cities. In Samarkand, the stones of the Registan cool and keep a memory of day. Blue tiles hold the last thin thread of light as if it were silk. A slight wind moves across the square and the patterned stars vines, patient geometry seen to exhale. In Bukhara, the Po-i-Kalyan minaret stands like a careful candle, its brickwork ringed with shadows, its crown quiet against the sky. Round Lyabi-Hauz, plane trees lean over the water and write small ripples with their leaves. The surface returns a dimmer, kinder version of the moon. These cities are not in a hurry. They were built for long nights and slow stories. Tea is poured, steam rises, cardamom drifts, and bread opens along a seam as if it were telling you where to break it. Courtyards hold their coolness, wooden pillars keep a forest's patience, and turquoise domes breathe in and out as steadily as sleep. Somewhere, an old storyteller speaks in an inner room. His voice is low enough to let the walls do their good work. He does not command the hours, he invites them. He begins with a road, a caravan, a lantern, a gate. He ends always with a blessing that sounds like quiet. Walk the Registan in your mind, and let your steps sound soft on the stone. On one side, Allah Beg's madrasa keeps the memory of star maps and gentle arguments. On another, lions in tile walk among sunbursts in a procession that has not tired in centuries. On the third, the golden hush collects under arches that learn to hold light without spilling it. Stand in the center and breathe. Patterns do not rush you. They teach you how to be still. Far away, a cart rolls down a lane. Nearer, a book closes with the small dignity that only paper knows. Bukhara answers in its own key. Follow a modest street that remembers footsteps better than names. A wooden iwan throws a rectangle of shade. A child's laugh runs ahead and vanishes around a corner where an old door sits under a lintel carved with leaves that forgot how to fall. The square widens, water opens. Lyabi-Hauz is a held breath, and the tea houses around it are a ring of lamps. Cups touch saucers like quiet bells. You sit, the bench gives back your weight with courtesy, and the evening finds its rhythm. Tea bread story pause. The minaret keeps time without telling anyone what to do. History here is not a parade of kings. It is a long practice of hospitality. Caravans came with silk and pepper, glass and paper, indigo and rumor. They found courtyards ready, cisterns full, stables aired, a corner of shade promised and kept. Stone learned to welcome, arches deep enough to drink the heat, domes tiled so sky could visit without leaving, niches for lamps so that faces were seen kindly. When day was harsh, these were rooms of forgiveness. When night arrived, they were instruments tuned to moonlight. You can hear the astronomer in Samarkand without climbing any hill. He is measuring not authority but distances, not fear but angles, not crowns but the patience of planets. The city learned his habit. It measures seasons by the taste of grapes, prayers by the spread of shadow under colonnade, rest by the weight of a hand on a warm brick. In Bukhara, the muezzin climbs and his voice enters the air like water entering a pool, no splash, only widening circles. Streets open their shutters a fingerwidth more. Somewhere a loom begins its quiet counting. Somewhere a scribe dots an I as if he were laying a seed where it will grow. Let the markets shrink to their evening selves. Silk loses its glare and keeps its softness. Brass cools to a color you can trust. Spices sit like dunes of color and give away their names if you breathe near them. Coriander, cumin, saffron, mint. Sellers talk the way rivers talk to stones. Nothing presses. A cat crosses a threshold like a lesson in composure. From a tandoor, bread appears with a small charred star at the center. A hand dusts off flour. The world agrees that this is enough. Doors matter here. Some are painted the green of oasis water, some the blue of a distant mountain at noon, some the brown of old apricots. Many are carved with patient patterns, knots that refuse to end, flowers that have learned algebra, borders that know when to stop. Knock, and the sound returns as if a room were saying your name back to you to make sure it has it right. Step through and a courtyard unfolds pomegranate shade, a basin that holds a square of sky. If you sit long enough, a sparrow will decide the situation is harmless and will continue with its excellent and important work. Let the past stay as close as you can bear it. Think of scholars with ink on their fingers arguing gently about the shape of a word, of artisans laying tile by tile in a grammar of blue, of travelers taking off boots under portico and putting their tired feet on cool stone, of women telling children a story that has no villain, only a road and enough water, of night guards who learn a city's breathing and walk it like a familiar prayer. These are the pieces out of which sleep is made. When you are ready, take the cities with you in the simplest way. Imagine the weight of a small cup of tea in your hand, and the smell that says sweetness once, then leaves you to decide. Imagine the curve of a dome against a clean sky and the way that curve persuades your thoughts to round their corners. Imagine a minaret that has learned how to be tall without a single boast. Imagine, finally, a bench by water and a place at the edge of a square where the air is the temperature of kindness. Sit there. Whatever needed to be said tonight has been said slowly, and that is the correct speed. Now close your eyes. Samarkand keeps your place in the Registan. Bukhara keeps your place by the pool. The tiles are cool. The wind is safe. The lamps are small and steady. If a story must finish itself, it will do so while you are already asleep, and will set itself quietly on the table like a folded scarf. Evening collects itself around a pool in Bukhara, and the water keeps its part of the bargain, to be calm, to be reflective, to remember without insisting. Round Lyabi-Hauz the trees lean in their trunks seasoned by summers and lay a circle of shade that lingers even when the sun has left. Lanterns in the tea-houses come alive one by one like patient fogs. Cups begin their soft conversation with saucers. The air smells of bread and mint. The benches give their old creak, and then settle under familiar weight. Nothing asks you to hurry. You sit at the pool's edge and watch the surface practice stillness. It knows how to hold a moon without spilling it. It knows how to turn voices into a softer version of themselves. Pigeons take the low parapet and agree, in their efficient way, to be part of the evening. Somewhere a domino taps wood, a small victory. Somewhere a child shoos a cat with more ceremony than needed, and both are pleased with the result. The square has learned hospitality so thoroughly that even the stone behaves. Steps are worn where steps should be. A ledge is at the right height for elbows. The wooden pillars along the U-ones keep the shade steady and the wind honest. When the samovar sighs, a tray of glass cups arrives. The tea is the color of amber held up to sunlight you cannot see. A thin slice of lemon floats as if choosing a direction. You hold the glass at its rim and feel the precise warmth that invites, not tests. Look around and the buildings speak in their quiet accents. Tiles the color of rivers after rain. Lintels carved with vines that forgot how to end. A gateway that promises two things at once, Come in and be at ease. The pool answers for everyone. Traders have cooled their talk here after long roads. Scholars have let their thoughts untie themselves one loop at a time. Travelers have looked into the water and found a map that points them back to themselves. If the city has a pulse, it passes through this basin. Eased, unhurried, a waiter sets bread in front of you round, with a pressed star at the center. He tears a piece and gestures to the salt. His hands are a lesson in brevity, his smile a small translation of welcome. He is never far from the kettle, which holds the evening together the way a spine holds a book. Near the big plane trees, old men test each other with chess problems. Each move lands like a small polite cough. One laughs, not loudly, just enough to grease the hinge of time. Stories are a currency here, but the prices are kind. An artisan points at a wooden door across the square and says his uncle carved it when he was a boy. The door nods in the lamplight, and this is therefore true enough. A traveler repeats the route she took along the ridge road, counting passes on her fingers. Someone adds the memory of a spring that tasted faintly of iron. Someone else remembers a guest house with pomegranates stacked like lanterns. The pool listens with a face so composed it encourages more talk. A boy stands on tiptoe to watch a dragonfly. It writes a slow letter on the water and leaves no trace. Think of the hours as a procession of little kindnesses. Tea poured, a new log set on the brazier, a shawl ranged on a chair. The minaret's call arrives later in the evening like a hand settling on a shoulder. It does not interrupt. It includes. Shops breathe out their last customers, and the shutters close with a sound that suggests tomorrow. You feel it in your bones. The square has practice at being a square. It collects what the day brought, forgives it, and returns it improved. There are details that repay attention the way a road repays careful feet. Straw fan patterns in the bread crust echo the sun that left an hour ago. The copper ewers catch the lantern glow and turn it into smaller, portable moons. The painted beams show you flowers that never wilt. The floor stone swept, dampened with a few invisible drops, knows how to keep heat where it belongs, stored, not radiating. Even the cats have agreed to the rules. No noise, no begging, only presence and the occasional blink that means, we are all doing well. A breeze arrives from a lane where someone has rinsed figs. It carries the cold edge of night and the memory of spice. The pool accepts the breeze, scuffs its surface once, and then is calm again. You can measure your breath by it. You can measure your thoughts by the way light sits on the water and stays. A duck one, unhurried, draws a silver seam behind it. The seam straightens and vanishes. Trouble would be ashamed to come here without washing its hands first. If you listen closely, the square tells you how to sleep. It says, make a list you will not finish. It says, keep a cup half full until the steam goes invisible, and then drink and do not refill. It says, let your spine agree with wood. Let your shoulders learn from the trees. It says, you do not have to be large in order to rest well. A pool can be shallow and still hold the moon. On some nights, a musician sits near the water and coaxes a tune that has no destination. The melody walks the square once, then once again, choosing the shady side both times. It stops where a story should stop, not with a flourish, but with a breath. The pool keeps the last note a moment longer than the air does and then returns it quietly to the bottom. When you rise, you do it as if not to wake someone. The bench releases you with a sigh of approval. The waiter nods as if to say that the conversation between your cup and the evening went well. You place a hand on the parapet. Cool now, the stone, which has been doing this all its life, steadies you. The trees lean a little closer as you pass, but only to bookmark you, not to detain you. The water keeps your reflection in storage in case you return before dawn. And you will, if only in the room of your mind. Lyabi-Hauz is good at keeping places ready. As you drift towards sleep, it will set out the same quiet furniture, lamp, cup, shade, ripple, breath. The square will not close. It will keep the moon rehearsed, the benches smooth, the tea just shy of sweet. When you arrive again, eyes closed, hands empty, it will make room. The way water makes room for the night without complaint. Night leans over the edge of Samarkand, and the sky opens like a careful book. The hill keeps its steady shape. The city below softens to a hush. And on the ridge, where an astronomer once taught the air to wait, a long, patient arc of stone sleeps in the earth, the remnant of a sextant big enough to hold an angle the size of a thought. You stand where stairs descend into coolness, and feel the ground keep your balance for you. Above, stars take their places without ceremony. This is a room without a roof, a classroom with only one subject, and no need to raise its voice. Ullah-Beg's students once stepped down these very stairs with lamps cupped in their hands like additional moons. They brought wax tablets, reed pens, and the kind of attention that makes ink braver. They did not come to win an argument with the sky. They came to be instructed by measurement. The stone slit that curves along the trench does not ask what you believe. It asks what angle you see, and then it remembers it. Listen long enough and you can hear how the place taught them to breathe. Count with the stars, one slow inhale for Orion's shoulder, one even exhale for the tail of the Big Bear. The planet that looks like a peeled apricot tonight will not hurry. The one that has nearly the color of copper will ignore anything that resembles a deadline. A student murmurs a number, another repeats it, a third writes it down with the care a gardener gives a seed. Out over the darkness, a dog barks twice and decides that is sufficient. The observatory's manners are perfect. Stone holds its temperature. The trench keeps the nights cool like a cellar. A ledge is exactly where a hand wants to pause. The instruments, wood, brass, string, are asleep in the history you carry, but their grammar still lingers in the ground, a line, steady, note, confirm. When the breeze arrives from the city, it brings a thin perfume of bread and wood smoke. The figures do not mind. The multiplicity of the world can be safely reduced here to a few kind symbols that do not betray what they stand for. Think of the astronomer himself, not as a portrait, but as an attitude. He is a host who thinks good conversation requires good measurement. He does not bully the heavens into meaning. He waits for them to disclose themselves in numbers that pass easily from ear to hand. It is a hospitality of angles. His students are guests who become family. Years later, they will remember the exact timbre of the night when they first learned how to hear the difference between almost and precisely. Down in the trench, the sky comes closer. A moth writes a small, illegible note across the lamp flame and continues on. Somewhere a page is turned. The sextant's curve receives starlight like a bowl catching rain. If a cloud crosses, nobody sighs. This is a school that includes patience in its curriculum. The chalk line is not an opinion. It is a promise to return tomorrow and look again. From here, Samarkand is a bracelet of lamps on a wrist you trust. The Registan keeps the square ready. The domes keep their blue. The minarets keep the air in rhythm. Up here you keep time another way, by the arc of a planet's small drift, by the angle a star makes with an edge you can touch, by the silence that grows when everyone present agrees to let the world declare itself slowly. And yet, this is not stern work. Someone shares grapes. Someone laughs as softly as a glove. Someone asks a question that will not be answered tonight and feels no disappointment. The notebook that holds the numbers also holds a brown petal flattened months ago when the apricots finished. A cat that has climbed too far up the stair decides to sit exactly on the one number nobody needs until later. It is, in other words, a human place. You rest a hand on the stone. It is cool enough to keep you from thinking too quickly and warm enough to keep you from leaving. The sky gives you nothing you can keep in a pocket except calm, which, if you are honest, is what you came for. Far away, a bell or something like one moves a single note across the night and lays it down where it belongs. The page in your head turns without a hand. When you go, you ascend slowly, as if returning from a conversation with someone older who was kind. The steps remember your feet as if they had been expecting them. At the top, the wind has changed key. It carries a hint of dew. The city lights seem nearer, as if the observatory had drawn them closer. You look back once. The trench holds the darkness politely, and will keep it safe until morning. Later, when sleep invites you, it will use this place as its guide. You will feel the long curve of the sextant like a cradle. You will count 2 or 3 steady breaths, as if they were stars along an arc. You will keep one figure in your mind, not a number, but a shape. The clean line where observation meets patience and becomes rest. The night will do the rest of the arithmetic on your behalf. Some cities learn to breathe through courtyards. Samarkand and Bukhara do it so well that a single door can open the lungs of a whole house. The street is narrow wooden balconies leaning a little, walls remembering sun, and then a blue door appears with a lattice of patient carving. The knock is modest. The sound returns as if the wood were saying your name back to you, gently confirming it. The latch lifts. Coolness meets your face like a well-timed answer. Inside, the world is rearranged into calm. A rectangle of shade on one side under a wooden iwan. A crescent of light on the paving. A square of sky so close you could fold it. Pomegranate branches tilt their red lanterns over a basin. The water keeps a small moon ready even at noon. Pillars wear rings of shadow like bracelets. Vines write soft handwriting up the plastered wall. A cat decides you are part of the furniture and proceeds with its dignified unimportance. The blue doors themselves are a lesson in restraint. Some are the color of oasis water, some the rinse of sky after dawn, some the deep glaze you see on domes when the light turns kind. Their carvings are algebra disguised as flowers, loops that never finish, petals that understand symmetry without bragging about it. Iron rings hang at a height the hand finds naturally. When they move, they speak a brief, courteous sentence in metal. Above the lintel, a strip of calligraphy tilts like a smile blessing threaded into wood. Courtyards are practical instruments tuned to comfort. Summer heat gathers at the rims while cool sits in the center like a guest of honor. At sunrise, the iwan shade pours itself exactly where cushions wait. At midday, the basin turns the light into quieter versions of itself and sends them under the vines. In the evening, the air learns how to be silk. Someone brings a tray, small porcelain cups, a teapot breathing steam, sugar that waits without pushing. Bread appears with its star pressed in the middle, a tiny constellation you can touch. You sit against a rolled bolster and learn the grammar of stillness. A sparrow drops to the lip of the basin, drinks, and lifts away, leaving a perfect circle that runs to the edge and is welcomed. Somewhere beyond the wall, a cart goes by with the soft thud of steady work. Closer, an elderly voice arranges a lullaby between 2 rooms. The melody finds the courtyard, tests the echo, and settles. Someone shakes a suzani out in the shade, flowers and suns and vines in red and indigo, and the cloth floats a heartbeat before agreeing to the line of the rope. If you watch the ground, you will see the day explained in bold and light. Shadow pulls under the pillars and then stretches out to greet the doorstep. Noon draws all the lines shorter, evening pulls them long. It is an old game, and the house always wins because it was designed to listen. The bricks keep a memory of winter's fire. The plaster keeps a memory of line and rain. The timber keeps a memory of trees that learn patience by standing together. There is a corner for work and a corner for rest, and the border between them is a launch radius. A loom hums without hurrying. A book lies open with a reed pen resting like a slender bird across it. A mortar waits for mint and salt. A low brazier coaxes the kettle to that polite pre-boil in which all good conversations live. Children cross and recross the light in barefoot edits. A grandmother catches a sleeve as it passes and tucks it without comment. Decisions are made at the pace of tea. Some afternoons a trader steps in from the street with a cloth bundle, and the air makes room. Out come tiles the size of a palm, blue on blue patterns, like snow that refuses to be cold. Out come brass cups that know how to hold both water and reflection. Out comes a stack of postcards from nowhere and everywhere, and someone laughs at a camel wearing a hat and declares the world well furnished. The courtyard does not clutter, it edits, it chooses a few polite sentences to keep, and lets the rest wander back to the gate. Evening is when these rooms become most themselves. The sky tilts into indigo. The first star thinks twice and then commits. A string of small lamps finds its way along the beam. The basin takes a quarter of the moon and keeps it safe. The air is no longer hot. It is charitable. A prayer, barely above whisper, braids with the patter of water poured into cups. The door to the street is unlatched but not opened. Guests become family, and family find they need fewer words than they thought. You may sleep here without lying down, which is a rare compliment a place can pay. Let your eyes learn the pattern of a carved ceiling, and your breath match the pace of a leaf's trembling. Count backward by the number of pillars. Count forward by the number of tile rosettes you can see from where you are. Between counts, remember how quietly the door said your name when you knocked, and how the courtyard took responsibility for everything your hands were carrying. Before you leave, run a fingertip along the door's carved border. It is smooth. Warriors of hands have agreed on the same mark. The ring hangs cool, the wood is warm, the iron's small shadow is its only seriousness. When the latch drops, the sound is not an ending but a semicolon. This thought continues elsewhere. You return to the lamecomer, and taller by some measure that no instrument can mark. The courtyard remains behind, not empty but full of the business of rest. Later, as sleep proposes itself, your mind will rebuild the room without trying. A rectangle of shade, a square of sky, a circle of water, 3 shapes, perfectly sufficient. You will place a cup by the basin that isn't there and hear steam that never hurries. And you will step through a blue door that opens, as all good doors do, onto a space that keeps what you set down and returns it in the morning, folded, cooler, easier to carry. Morning begins as a whisper along the stalls. The city has not fully chosen day yet. The sky is a pale cloth being unrolled, and the domes over the old trading lanes hold a last bit of cool the way a hand holds a promise. A shutter lifts. Another, a third. Hinges clear their throats softly. The first copper scoop goes into the spice bin, and the air answers at once. Coriander, cumin, pepper, a thread of saffron you can almost see with your eyes closed. Under the low brick vaults, light arrives in agreeable stripes. It pauses on a stack of folded ikat until the colors decide to wake. It slides across a brass bowl and becomes a small sun. It settles beside scales that have balanced patience and wait for longer than any one person can count. Footsteps come carefully, then confidently, then at the pace of people who have learned the path between one cent and another. Bread to figs, figs to nuts, nuts to tea. In Bukhara's trading domes, you can hear how the city learned to talk kindly with itself. A seller greets a neighbor without dividing the morning into yours and mine. A knife finds an orange and subtracts the peel in one long, generous answer. A cat patrols the lane for the color of toasted sesame, treating every hand that reaches out as a colleague rather than a client. The domes keep the cool. The stalls keep the order. The day keeps its balance by letting small things go first. You walk where the floor knows 1,000 routes and yet keeps them simple. Here the cap seller sets quilted hats in gentle hills, gray, navy, the green of a hidden spring. There the silk merchant lets cloth spill like water. When he lifts a corner, the pattern runs to your fingers without needing permission. A baker slides round loaves from a clay mouth and puts them in neat, repeating constellations. Their crust keeps yesterday's sun. Their soft inside promises today's. Smells stacked like quiet chords. Dried apricots, honey and dusk. Walnuts, wood and rain. Black tea that waits for its steam to be named. Mint that has learned to be both leaf and air. Somewhere someone cracks a pistachio with a sound that belongs to this hour the way a bird call belongs to another. Someone else shakes almonds in a pan. The tin makes a friendly clatter, and the almonds answer by turning fragrant. You are not hungry in any urgent way. But the market teaches appetite as gently as a teacher lays down a chalk line. Coins pass from hand to hand and say little. The scales move with the same courtesy they afforded to grandparents, and to their grandparents before that. A boy serious, sleeves rolled, ties thin stringer on a paper of reasons. His knot is a small pride he doesn't announce. An old man tests a belt by pulling it once and nods as if to an old friend. Nobody hurries the way city people hurry in places that have forgotten the correct size of a morning. Light grows, but the vaults are careful with it. They break it into useful pieces, a square for judging the color of pomegranates, a stripe for reading a list written last night, a wash across the tea glasses to show which are clean and which still remember another conversation. Dust floats, but so politely you can pretend it is just the air deciding to be visible. The domes above are a soft geometry that tells the eyes where to rest and the voice how quietly to exist. A caravan might arrive later, but the stalls do not depend on caravans to prove themselves alive. They have their own rhythm, arrangement, greeting, tasting, wrapping, counting, a pause to sweep a little circle of floor as if blessing it. A woman sits on a low stool and threads beads, eyes half on her work and half on the square of mourning that advances across the bricks. A linen seller smooths his piles with open palms, as if he were calming water. A stranger with a good question is made less a stranger by the second sentence. Think of how many hands have taught the market its manners. Hands that weighed spice instead of throwing it. Hands that set a sample in the palm not to press a sale but to share a certainty. Hands that wrapped figs in paper that sounds like a small river when folded. Hands that found change in the pocket by listening to the shape of coins rather than by looking. Hands that pushed a cup of tea towards someone who had not asked yet because the question was already there in the shoulders. A bell somewhere small and ambitious gives the air a mild name. Traders move a step closer to the center of things. The lanes thicken just enough to feel like a story warming to its subject. You notice a seam of laughter where two stalls meet and decide to become neighbors again for another day. You notice a window high up where the morning has drawn a rectangle of light, and a sparrow uses it like a stage. You notice how the market allows noticing, as if that were one of its goods priced fairly and never in short supply. When you carry anything away from here, it will be lighter than it weighs. The raisins will keep the shape of a palm, the tea will keep the promise of steam, the bread will keep the star beneath its crust. Your pockets will smell like the day in a form you can unfold anywhere, a proof you can drink, a sweetness you can break and share, a pepper you can be brave with or generous with, or both. Even empty-handed, you would not leave with less. The market fills without occupying, feeds without insisting. By the time the sun has climbed past the dome's courtesy, the stalls are fully awake, but the hour you came for has already done its work. Morning is no longer a question, it has become a kindness applied to the rest of the day. You step back into the lane and the cool you carried from the vaults lingers like a companionable thought. Doors are open now. Voices have grown. The city busies itself with purpose. You have been given a small, durable portion of that purpose, to move through your hours with the market's even breath, and when sleep seeks you tonight, it will borrow this seam without asking. It will lay the domes over your thoughts to make shade. It will set out stalls of calm, a handful of almonds, a stack of folded cloth, a glass of tea cooling to the exact idea of evening. It will let footsteps pass and become fabric rather than noise. It will measure the dark the way the scale measured cumin fairly, and with a touch of old intelligence, and it will hand the balance back to you in the morning with a nod. Bukhara's evening gathers are on a column of brick that has learned how to be tall without noise. The Kalyan minaret rises the way a flame rises from a lamp, sure, steady, and uninterested in hurry. Its rings of patterned brick catch the last light and keep it like a memory. Shadows settle in the grooves the way ink settles in a well-cut letter. The courtyard at its feet grows quiet. The air takes on that particular temperature that makes you forgive the day. Stand near the base, and let your eyes climb in the slow way a prayer climbs circle by circle, band by band. Each course is a sentence in a language the hand understood first, crust turned laid smooth. You can feel craft in the wrist, patience in the shoulder, an old conversation between palm and clay that finished centuries ago and still says exactly what it meant. The tower does not lean. It listens. It listens to the square, to the footsteps, to the learned hush that finds a place whenever evening does. Around you Po-i-Kalyan folds itself into kindness. The mosque's vast Iwan receives the dusk and returns it as a cooler blue. Tiles, which at noon speak with confidence, now become thoughtful. Their turquoise dins to the color of river water at night. The madrasa's fawade collects soft gold under its arch and holds it ready as a host holds bread near the table. Somewhere a door opens onto a courtyard and then forgets to close, because even doors need to hear the minaret count the hour. The tower's voice arrives without edge. When the call comes, it moves into the air like water entering a basin, no splash, just widening. The brick seems to breathe with it. A child stills. A cat arranges itself into better listening. An old man whose sandals know this ground by heart lifts his head and then lowers it again, satisfied that nothing required haste. The sound is not command. It is agreement. Yes, evening. Yes, lanterns. Yes, tea. Walk the perimeter, as if tracing the rim of a calm thought. Your hand finds cool stone along the parapet. Your feet find the softer lane where thousands of souls have preferred to pass. A boy carrying a tray of glasses moves like a small planet in a stable orbit. The tea is dark, the steam gentle. A chessboard waits beneath a plane tree. Two friends tilt forward without speaking. A night hops, and the board accepts the change as if it had been always meant. The minaret watches without watching. It has no opinions about victories. It cares for measures, of light, of shadow, of tone. Look up again and let the eye climb into dusk. The crown simple, decisive cuts a neat circle from the sky. Swift circle there like thoughts that will not quite sit. Then they do. Somewhere in the brickwork, a pale lizard holds perfectly still and then becomes part of the wall again. If a breeze comes, it travels down the column in a voice the ear translates as cool. If you close your eyes, you could count those faint drafts like beads. Stories cling to the minaret because stories like vertical things. They say invaders once spared it, surprised by its grace. They say lamps once hung at the top to tell travelers where a city kept its heart. Whether these are true matters less than the way the tower keeps being useful to the mind. It is a visible thought, that height can be humble, that craft can be eloquent without being loud, that a single well-made line can steady a whole square of life. There are details the evening offers only if you are slow, a strip of shadow that keeps to the same brick band all the way around. A shard of tile lodged in mortar where a mason saved a corner and smiled to himself. A low socket in the wall where a lamp once lived. Soot faint as a remembered name. A small wedge of brick at a step's edge rubbed to satin by a particular footfall, perhaps a muezzin's, perhaps a caretaker's, perhaps 100 careful children learning how to stand still when darkness deepens. The tower loses its texture and becomes the idea of a tower, pure outline against a sky that has decided to be generous with stars. The courtyard floor cools. The bricks release the day's heat as if returning borrowed coins. Somewhere a kettle chooses to hum rather than boil. This is the hour when water prefers melody to speech. From a nearby room, pages turn with the sound of a moth leaving a window. The book, like the brick, knows how to carry weight quietly. If you sit, choose a step, and let your knees learn the geometry of rest. The minaret's height stops being height. It becomes a slow guide for breath. Inhale to the first band. Exhale to the second. Inhale again a little farther. No one is measuring your success. Even the tower is busy minding its own careful business, counting swifts, counting stars, counting how long a square can hold peace if given the chance. Leaving is a soft action here, like setting a cup down after the last sip. You stand, the stone accepts, The courtyard gives you back to the lane where lamps make small islands. You look once more over your shoulder and find that the tower has not moved, has never moved, and yet has walked you gently from day to night as surely as any companion. Later, when sleep seeks a shape, it will take this one, a tall, kind line inscribed in a blue field, a voice that arrives like water, a square that knows how to keep silence warm. It is enough. The brick candle burns without flame, and you lighter than a sigh go out, too, into an easy dark. Dawn approaches on the quiet side of Samarkand, and a narrow lane of mausoleums receives the first light like a careful guest. Shah-i-Zinda, the living king, is not a street you walk through. It is a breath you take slowly. Steps climb in short, respectful flights. On either side, turquoise and lapis, teal and sea-green tiles hold the pale sky in small, cool pieces. The stone warms by degrees. The world remembers how to whisper. At the base, you pause and the hill answers with stare and shade. The threshold is not loud. It is exact. You climb, and the tile work begins its soft conversation. Glazed bricks that keep a sheen even when the sun is shy. Calligraphy that loops and rests, and loops again. Stars nested inside stars until pattern becomes calm. Between the mausoleums, the air is cooler, the sound gentler, the time obedient. If a sparrow tries out a note, the blue gives it back twice, once for the ear, and once for the part of you that catalogues tenderness. Every feuillade is a page in a quiet book. Some are bordered by vines that never learn to wilt. Some carry bands of script that travel like rivers from corner to corner, naming blessings in a language that has practiced restraint. Rosettes bloom where geometry meets mercy. At eye level, a tile may hold a delicate crack, the kind that proves a long, honest life. Nothing here is new. Everything is freshly patient. You run a fingertip along a cool edge and it reads you as gently as you read it. The steps make you measure yourself in pleasant units. 6 breaths, a landing. 5 breaths, the doorway. 1 long breath, a look upward into small squares of sky. The shade shifts like a courteous veil. Somewhere behind a grill, someone murmurs a verse, and the syllables move as evenly as the tiles suggest. A caretaker pauses with a broom of palm fibers, and the bristles write a temporary script in dust that the morning wind edits kindly. The place is kept, not polished, tended, not posed. Stand before one portal, and let it explain its grammar. A frame of glazed brick, deep blue, almost night. A border of tiny white tiles like a row of patient teeth. A band of Kufic script that knows the value of a right angle. Above, a pointed arch that agrees with the sky. Inside the arch, a field of stars tessellated so tightly that you begin to feel the pattern slow your pulse. No rush. The eyes learn the pleasure of staying. Names live here quietly. Princes and scholars, mothers and daughters, saints whose stories are partly stone and partly air. The mausoleums do not compete. They keep each other company the way good elders do, each with a chair, each with a view, each with a ready blessing, and no need to speak first. The hill holds them together, and the stair stitches them into a single, steady climb. You understand why pilgrims come soft-shoed and why even laughter, when it happens, is folded thin between 2 domes. The lane narrows to an intimacy that could hold a single conversation for a century. You can smell lime and clay, a trace of grass, the faint mineral of glazed earth. A tiny lizard crosses in a bright gash and becomes the color of stone in half a heartbeat. Overhead, the domes curve like bowls held up to catch blue. Light pours in and does exactly what it is told. Here, a pale wash. There, a bright coin. Farther on, a seam of silver where tile meets shadow. You notice kindness is hidden at human height. A stone bench exactly where the body requests it. A niche for a lamp with soot faint as a memory. A low ledge that makes a good place to set a cup. The architecture knows the weight of prayer and the weight of an elbow and honors both. Even the gutters have learned to carry last winter's rain with dignity. Patterns are not for show. They are for regulating breath. At the upper landing, The lane opens. The city below assembles itself, domes like small oceans, minarets like careful fingers, courtyards like the calm faces of clocks. For a moment you hold to scales at once, the intimate blue of tile at your fingertips, and the broad blue of morning over the plain. The hill stands between them like a mediator that has never lost a case. A breeze travels up the stair and becomes a cool hand on your forehead. Stories cling here, as they do to anything that manages to be both beautiful and necessary. They say a living saint walked this slope, and then did not stop. They say the gates were once a little wider for a procession that needed them to be. They say a tile maker crushed glass with prayers, and sand with good humor, until both agreed to shine. You are not asked to decide. The lane keeps all the versions and lets each one stand where it can do no harm. If you step into one chamber mosaic echo, a small perfume of stone, the cool folds around you like a patient shawl. The dome inside is an inverted flower bright enough to persuade the voice to lower itself. A swallow's shadow passes across a patch of light and shows you how quickly grace can travel. Names are carved, but the room's true inventory is breath. Yours, those before you, those after, stacked without crowding. When you come back to the lane, the blue seems deeper, as if you had warmed it by looking. A woman ties a ribbon to a lattice and rests her palm there for a long moment. A child counts steps and forgets why, then keeps counting because numbers are a pleasing kind of toy. A man with a small brush coaxes dust from a letter, and the letter looks newly written without being new. The place is an agreement between craft and faith, between patience and passing time, between what is remembered and what is quietly let go. On the way down, the steps shorten your thoughts the way a lullaby shortens a waking. You notice that your shoulders have lowered of their own accord. You notice that your feet have chosen a careful rhythm and intend to keep it for the rest of the day. A bell far in the city lands on the slope like a single silver seed. The hill receives it and returns it as shade. Later, when sleep sorts your minutes into calmer piles, this lane will reappear, not with exact stones and counts, but with its wider lesson, that blue can be a temperature, that pattern can be a kind of kindness, that ascent is sometimes the gentlest way to descend. You will climb 2 steps in your mind and find a landing, another 2, and find a doorway, another 2, and find a sky that fits in the palm of your hand. Dusk arrives with the soft certainty of a key turning once. A high gate opens onto a square of quiet, and the caravanserais receives the evening the way a bowl receives water without argument. Hooves ring once on stone and then fall into hush. The courtyard is a measured geometry, long arcades for shade, stopped doors for rest, a fountain making a calm sound that edits the day down to its kinder senses. Lanterns wake one by one along the gallery like thoughts that have decided to be helpful. Travelers come in pieces and reassemble themselves here. A saddle is lifted and sighs. A bell is unbuckled and becomes a small moon in a groom's hand. Baskets that have known rope for a month take a breath precisely where a rope no longer touches. Someone laughs softly at a shared inconvenience. Someone holds a map that thinks it is a napkin. The place is built for this, to take a road's noise out of a body and return only direction. Along one wall, stalls hold the animal's concern and transform it into contentment. Hay is set down with the courtesy of a promise kept. A bucket meets a muzzle. A hand drags a brush in long, forgiving lines along a camel's side, and the big creature closes one eye in relief. Hoof picks click. Leather speaks in its old language of creep and ease. The courtyard's fountain learns their names in the way water learns everything, by being available. Rooms open from the arcade, each with its own square of calm. A rug unrolls and remembers its pattern even after 1,000 miles. A lamp is trimmed. A low bed proves that a single good board can be wiser than a complicated chair. In one doorway, 2 traders negotiate not about price but about tea, how strong, how late, how often. In another, a scholar sits with a small sheaf of paper and a reed pen. His notes look like tidy birds perched along a line. A child counts steps between doors and returns satisfied, having proven that the world contains exactly the right number. Smells layer themselves with good manners. Bread rises nearby, flour, yeast, a hint of fire that has learned patience. Stew makes its way from a kitchen where brass and clay have signed a truce. A handful of cardamom pods cracks beneath a mortar and releases a memory of mornings you haven't had yet. Somewhere, an orange is peeled in a long unbroken ribbon that swings once and is gone. The caravanserais is a recipe for rest. Stone, water, shadow, bread, sleep. You find a place along the arcade and sit. The stone under you holds the day's warmth and divides it evenly. A cup arrives without drama. Steam registers the dry air and draws a straight line you can trace with your eyes until it disappears. The first sip is not sweet. The second is exactly right. Two men at the next pillar play a game with stones that clip politely against wood. Their conversation travels a very short distance and never disturbs the air. The walls are thick enough to keep night gentle, thin enough to let stories pass. A woman tells of a pass where the wind wrote its name across the path. A boy describes a lake that looked like somebody had laid down a mirror in the desert. An old driver remembers a fox that sat and watched the world as if it had been hired for that purpose. No one interrupts. The courtyard edits each tale, removes hurry, leaves the good nouns and the verbs that know how to walk. Look up, and the sky has become the color of a ripe plum. A few early stars hold their breath. Swallows sign their names in a looping script along the roof line, and then fold themselves into the eaves. The fountain keeps its kindness. The lanterns keep their steady grammar of gold. Somewhere, at the far corner, a door opens onto a small stable yard where quiet is kept like grain dry useful. Shared. There are marks a caravanserai leaves on a person without asking. Your shoulders drop by the height of one brick. Your breath decides to match the fountain's rhythm without consulting you. Your feet remember how to be bare on clean stone. A list of tasks you thought important dissolves into categories. Can wait, already done, never needed. The road is still out there. It is easier when a place like this holds part of it for you overnight. Consider the architecture's courtesy. The gate is tall enough to forgive a misjudged load. The corners are rounded where a tired shoulder might brush. The niches for lamps are cut at a height a hand finds without searching. The drainage knows where water wants to go and helps it get there without drama. An inscription near the entrance says nothing about power and everything about welcome, though the letters themselves only wish you peace. When the call to prayer folds itself across the courtyard, it does so like a blanket. Even those who keep their seats feel covered. Afterwards, someone hums a tune that has no endpoint, and it finds its echo under the arches and comes back improved. A guard walks the parapet once. The scrape of his boot tells you the stone is well. In a distant stall, an animal dreams, and the soft rumble of that dream is the kind of weather this place was designed to host. Sleep here begins before you lie down. It begins when a latch settles with a wooden yes. It begins when a pack is slipped under bed and becomes lighter than it was. It begins when the second cup of tea is refused kindly. By the time you draw the curtain across your door, the night has already memorized your name and promised to keep it till morning if you wake in the small hours. The courtyard will still be holding its shape. The fountain will talk to itself in a dialect only water understands. A single lantern may be left burning for a traveler who arrives after the stars have moved. It will still be bright enough to say welcome and dim enough to say rest. You will turn your pillow once, as if desert and mountain had just changed sides in your dream, and you will sleep again, apprenticed to the caravanserai's easy geometry. And when morning comes, it will come prickly, a pale stripe along the lintel, a kettle deciding to speak, a hoof stamping once to affirm the day. The gate will open the way a sentence opens to its final clause. The road will resume its long, patient line. You will carry from this place exactly what it meant to give, a measure of calm, a memory of stone that behaves, and the knowledge that a good roof can teach a traveler how to walk gently even after the roof is gone. In a quiet room off a narrow lane, morning is measured not by clocks but by the small, companionable sounds of work. The loom speaks first soft, wooden syllables, a shuttle's breath, a treadle's patient grammar. Dyed threads wait on a beam, their colors sleeping side by side. They know the pattern before the cloth exists. This is ikat design taught to yarn in advance, a lesson whispered in knots, and dye rather than drawn later with a brush. The day begins behind the cloth, where the warp is a forest of fine lines. Bundles of threads have been bound with string in careful bands, tied tight so dye cannot pass. Indigo sits nearby in a vat the color of a night sea. Madder glows in a pot like a jar of sunset. Pomegranate rind gives up a gold that looks like the memory of noon. A woman empties a section and readies it elsewhere, her fingers moving with certainty learned from years and from the hands before hers. She does not rush. She watches the skein drink the dye slowly, as if the yarn were considering. When she lifts it, there turns the blue Rio. The color blooms in contact with breath and light. There is a small joy in this reveal every time, and the room smiles without needing mouths. The warp goes back to the frame with its new senses of color bands interrupted, dots nested, soft teeth of light, and dark aligned by eye. The weaver leans close, aligns, tugs, smooths. The shuttle is loaded with a weft that is plainer, a steady friend. Under over, the cloth registers the meeting. What looked like confusion resolves. A cloud appears, then a flame, then a small mountain seen from far away. If a line wobbles, it is a generous wobble, the kind that tells you a person made this and meant you to feel invited, not examined. The room is a good listener. Its plaster walls keep summer's heat outside and let winter's warmth remain. A low window holds a square of sky that shifts from linen to pale tea as the hours turn. Near the door, a kettle begins thinking about boiling. On a shelf, cones of yarn stand like quiet towers. Cream, smoke, river, fig skin. The floor knows every foot that has stood here and has a smoothness that makes bare soles feel like a decision. A cat tries the threshold, decides the rhythm will be fine, and curls exactly where the sunlight will arrive in half an hour. On the wall, an old suzani hangs a garden stitched into fabric, pomegranates that never go out of season, suns that never set, vines that praise the idea of persistence. It is a cousin to the weaving on the loom, another way of putting patience into pattern. Between the two, a conversation continues quietly about how best to remember beauty, in woven blur, in stitched bloom and lines that do not insist on being straight, as long as they are sincere. If you lean in, the pattern behaves like calm water. What looks dizzy from a distance becomes restful up close. Indigo meets cream in a feathered edge. Madder leans into smoke. The eye forgets to count and begins to breathe instead. The weaver adjusts the tension with small, sure motions of wrist and ankle. A visitor would not see the decisions. They are the kind you feel through wood and string. Tap, draw, beat, rest. The shuttle slides like a thought that knows where it is going and does not need to announce itself. Stories settle in such rooms without ceremony. A mother taught a daughter how to count the ties by touch, not sight 1, 2, 3 and not 1, 2, 3 not so a pattern could be learned by the hands even when the lamp was low. A grandfather once boiled indigo at night so the vat would be ready by dawn, humming to keep time with the slow breath of the dye. A neighbor remembers when a bundle fell into the wrong pot and came out a color nobody expected but everybody liked. The weavers decided the mistake was a cousin, not a stranger, and kept it. The cloth on the beam now carries a thin river of that unplanned shade, like a quiet joke told across generations. Outside, the lane murmurs, a cart's wheel, a greeting traded across a doorway, a child practicing the clever art of not being in the way. Inside, the loom continues its small poem, warp holes, weft wanders, and returns. The beater gathers what has happened and makes it behave. Tea arrives in small glasses. Sugar offers itself. The steam writes soft punctuation marks in the air. The weaver sips without stopping. The pattern does not mind. It prefers humane pace to machine certainty. You may touch the fabric as it leaves the loom's mouth. It is warmer than it looks and softer than you expect. The design on the surface is not a surface thing. It is part of the thread itself. This is why the blur at the edges feels kind. It is not an error. It is the place where color learned to share. On the table, completed cloths fold into stacks of shade, smoke and cream, blue and bone, ember and ash, apricot and night. Each bears a name someone gave in the workroom. Plowed lane, pomegranate road, window at dusk. Names are a way of admitting affection and keeping inventory at once. From time to time, the weaver stops and stands back to see the hole. The pattern holds. A small mischief in the corner where a streak of indigo leans farther than plan stays. It is a signature of the day, the slight tilt by which a week will be remembered. She ties off, smooths the edge, and looks at the beam with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows how a day should sound when it lands correctly. The cloth will go to a market dome later. Hands will test it. Eyes will decide. A seller will tell its story in sentences the cloth has earned. Not far away, another workshop prepares the warp for a different pattern. Strings are tied tighter in places. Other sections are left to drink dye until the color goes almost black. The bundles look like bundles, secrets folded and bound, and then on the frame, they resolve into another language you didn't know you could read. That is ikat's courtesy. It offers complexity with a smile, asks nothing of you except that you allow your eye to rest. The room's last gifts are the smallest. A speck of indigo on the weaver's thumb like an extra fingerprint. A thread clinging to the hem of a visitor's sleeve, hitching a ride back to a courtyard where suzani hangs and bread cools. A pencil mark on the loom post of short lines, one long, that means the pattern will start to pitch higher tomorrow. A crack in the old floor that follows the path of 1,000 careful steps and looks like a river on a winter map. These things do not ask to be noticed. When you do notice them, they bless you with a calm that belongs to practiced work. When evening leans into the window, the loom answers with a final, polite sentence. The shuttle rests. The warp exhale is audible to those who listen. The kettle cools with a sound like a sigh that forgives. The cloth is lifted and folded. It remembers the curve of the beam and will forget it tomorrow under an iron that has learned gentleness. The door is pulled to, not shut. The room prefers phrases that can continue. Later, as sleep arranges your thoughts into soft stacks, the loom's rhythm will reorganize your own. Under, over. A steady foot finding the treadle without looking. A shuttle passing from left hand to right and back again. Knots tied where they need to be and never where they do not. You will dream in blurred edges that are not failure but kindness, in colors that touched water and chose to stay, in patterns that learned themselves before the cloth did. And you will wake with the odd, durable feeling that your day has already been woven a little kinder than usual. Morning slips into a garden by the river where the air already knows how to be gentle. Here paper is not just made, it is invited. Mulberry trees keep a confident green. Their bark, once taken, grows back with the stubborn good manners of living things that expect to be useful again. A channel of clear water runs past a low workshop. Wheels turn, paddles lift and fall with a rhythm that makes the day breathe evenly. Inside, the room is bright without glare. Bundles of mulberry bask soak in troughs until the fibers loosen and forget their strictness. A worker lifts a pale strip and tests it with two-finger stuff, but willing. Another sits with a wooden mallet and coaxes the softened bark into pulp. The sound is a carefully spaced knocking, like a polite visitor at a door that will always be opened. Nearby, a vat waits, square and calm, a small pond where paper will be born. The recipe is simple because it has been practiced so long: clean water, patient pulp, a whisper of starch to keep fibers friendly. A mold and decal sink under the surface and come up with a thin, even skin of future sheet. Water drains through woven reed. Fibers settle into a quiet democracy, no voice louder than another, no space undecided. The hand tilts, the edge drips, the sun on the wall moves a small degree. The sheet is laid onto felt with a gentle press. Couch, lift, repeat. A stack grows, each layer a breath laid on a breath. In another corner, a press with a wooden screw leans its slow strength onto the stack. Water threads its way back to the vat to be used again and again. The room smells like clean linen and wet wood, with a friendly edge of starch that says order is being kept. On the plastered wall, earlier sheets dry in a neat grid. They hold the light softly and make the room feel taller. A cat studies the rectangles and decides there is nothing to improve. There is a stage for burnishing a low bench, a smooth agate. A hand that knows when to insist and when to let the sheet keep its softness. The stone moves in small circles. Sheen appears not as glare but as the memory of water. A fingernail taps the surface. The sound is a tiny bell, proof that the fibers have agreed to become one thing. The pile of finished sheets gains weight without gaining impatience. Stories sit comfortably in this workshop without asking for chairs. A grandfather once taught a grandson how to read pulp with a fingertip, closed eyes, a single circle, a yes or not yet. A daughter learned to count the vat lifts by birdsong outside the window. Swallows gave her morning numbers, sparrows the afternoon. A visitor from far away wrote a letter on a fresh sheet before the ink was dry and the words blurred into the paper as if the page preferred keeping confidences. Everyone laughed kindly. Another sheet was offered, and the letter traveled uncomplaining for half a world. Samarkand's paper has the temperament of the city, strong, hospitable, slow to tear, fond of ink. Scribes love it because a reed pen's line lies on it like a river on good banks. Illuminators love it because gold leaf rests there as if it had always belonged. Books built from these stacks behave well on shelves, and better in hands. They open without sulking, they close without sulking. They age like apricots left in shade, softening, sweetening, holding their shape. Watch the gestures that make the day. A worker skims foam from the vat with a flat hand. The water clears. Another trues the mold with a thumb along its edge. The frame answers by staying square. Someone tilts a stack of drying sheets into a friendlier patch of sun. The sheets say nothing and dry a little better for it. The wheel outside turns, paddle into water, water into lift, lift into patience. Time here is kept not by clocks but by felt, by walls, by how swiftly a damp sheet loses its shadow. The garden steps in as a partner without drawing attention. Mulberry leaves lift in a breeze. A bee rehearses a route near a small border of mint. The river reminds the paddles to keep kindness in their knock. At midday, a tray arrives, tea the color of amber, bread with a pressed star center, a handful of walnuts that still remember branches. Starch paste stiffens slightly in its bowl, and then remembers to be ready again. A swallow sketches looks beneath the rafters, then sits and watches as if audits were part of its contract. If you hold a new sheet up to the light, you see the vat's memory, faint ripples, a laid pattern, a watermark shaped like a leaf or a moon. Your thumb finds the difference between edge and heart. The sheet flexes, then resolves, then rests. It does not demand to be written on. It invites. Somewhere in the city, a calligrapher lifts a pen. Somewhere else, a schoolboy copies a map. In a courtyard, a poem grows out of ink like a vine climbs a quiet wall. Afternoon gathers the room into a slower key. Piles are counted, stacks squared, the press eased until tomorrow. A wet broom swishes the floor. The straw bristles write a watery sentence that means finish for now. The window carries a new rectangle of light to the wall and sets it down near the agate, which holds it for a while. A sheet is rejected for a small flaw and pinned by the door so that circulation can make use of its honesty. Nothing is wasted that can be folded, dried, or taught. Paper is a simple miracle that never learned to brag. Plant into fiber, fiber into web, web into page, page into memory. Samarkand keeps that chain intact with tools you could name in one breath, and a patience you could learn in an afternoon and spend a lifetime practicing. If you linger until the workers leave, the room keeps its shape. The vet calms. The felts dry. The last damp sheet drinks the last of the day from plaster. Twilight takes its turn with the garden, the mulberries darker, the river lower voice. Swallows trade the rafters for a neat seam along the roof. The wheel slows, then stops with a final, agreeable click. The door draws to. The latch settles. The place holds the silence exactly the way it held the water, evenly, without complaint. When sleep comes, it will use these images like tools. A mold rising from a square of calm. A sheet laid true with a single, careful press. A palm smoothing air out from under a page. Fibers taking each other's hands. The mind will dip, lift, couch, press. It will stack its hours into a pile that dries straight. By morning, your thoughts will feel like good paper, light, strong, ready for ink that does not need to hurry. Before the domes learned to shine, the color had to be taught to earth. On a quiet edge of the city, where mulberry shadows lie long and the wind carries flour from a distant mill, low kilns rest like sleeping animals. Piles of clay wait under damp cloth. Glazed bowls line a shelf like small moons. Sacks of ground minerals whisper their patient chemistry: silica, copper, cobalt, tin. Morning arrives without a clatter. A kettle thinks about boiling. A sparrow practices landing on the kiln's warm shoulder and decides the temperature is a kindness. The tile maker needs clay with a rhythm older than his tools. Fold, press, turn, breathe. The clay remembers riverbeds and shade. It yields with dignified reluctance, and then with trust. A board receives a slab. A wire finds the correct thickness by listening more than by cutting. Wooden molds, flowers, stars, interlaced bands wait on the bench, each one a quiet promise. Pressed into the slab, they do not shut their shapes. They suggest them, leaving edges that a thumb will later teach to soften. On another table, a brush rests across a shallow dish of slip, the color of unsweetened cream. The tile maker lifts a piece that has learned firmness overnight and paints the first pale coat. The surface loses its grit and gains a future. Designs are drawn not with hurry, but with the confident slowness of someone who knows that geometry is a kind of prayer. 8 pointed stars that hold their centers as if they were breathing. Vines that twine like patient senses. Borders that know when to stop. Glazed bowls glow in modest shades. A dry cobalt that looks like ground evening. A copper green like an orchard at dusk. A white that keeps secrets of tin. The brush dips and returns with a fine, obedient edge. A line becomes a petal. A petal becomes a rosette. The rosette settles where the tile will someday listen to sunlight. Where two colors meet, they feather slightly, a softness that domes will later dignify. Nothing is rigid. Nothing is careless. Outside, the kiln yawns open, an arched mouth of brick blackened to velvet. Shelves slide in on rails that have learned generosity from years of heat. Each tile stands on tiny spurs so glaze won't lock it to its neighbor. Between them, thin breathy spaces promise even firing. The tile maker arranges the load as if setting a table for a long, thoughtful conversation. Blues where the kiln's heart is coolest. Whites where the flame will spend more of itself. Greens where patience is needed. A shard of sacrificial clay test piece ducks into a corner to report later what heat has chosen to say. Firing begins while the air is still honest about being morning. Wood goes in the kind that burns without grudge. The flame learns the room low, then higher, then a humming that the ear mistakes for wind. The tile maker watches through the spy hole with an attention that is almost rest. A small cone on a shelf tilts and bows at the right hour. He has reached the letter meant to. He feeds the kiln with measured hands. The bricks talk to each other. The arch answers. Ash floats and dissolves. There is no sound of hurry, only the sound of something agreeing to become what it was meant to be. Inside, powders melt into glass. Roughness remembers a smoother life. Blue wakes from dust into deep water. Cobalt finds its voice and keeps it. Where it thins, light passes through like a forgiven name. On some tiles, the edges blurred just enough to prove that fire is a collaborator, not an employee. On others, lines sharpen as if the kiln had decided to assist the brush. Every load tells a different version of the same true story. Earth, taught by flame, becomes sky around the kiln. The workshop holds a small world in order. A boy turns a sieve and makes the glaze fine as patience. An old woman wipes dust with a damp cloth that knows the doctrine of edges. Someone hums a tune without a destination. It fits the clink of bowls and the quiet chuff of air the kiln exhales between breaths. Tear eyes. The tilemaker wraps his fingers around the glass, listens to the kiln, and decides the sip can wait another half-minute. Even the cat understands this schedule. When the fire has said enough, bricks are pulled to let the heat fade at a pace that does not break what it has mended. Evening takes the workshop in its palms. The kiln glows with the color of ripe apricots behind the door, then with the color of old gold, then with the color of promises kept. Silence rearranges itself in the room, sets a stool square with a table, straightens a brush. The tilemaker rests his head back against the cool wall and closes his eyes without sleeping. Opening the kiln is a ceremony that never quite believes it has been practiced this many times. The door comes down, the warm breath steps out, and the tiles wake with the composure of guests who arrived exactly on time. Blue's river, dusk, almond skin at midnight hold their own weather. Green's garden after rain find corners to light. White's eggshell cloud make room for the others the way good hosts do. He lifts one tile. The light finds a ripple that only a hand can detect. He smiles at the small mischief of it and nods. He lifts another with 2 fingers at the edge where the spur mark will hide under grout. The glaze sings a little to the nail, a sound like a teacup agreeing to be set down. A few pieces confess their troubles. Hairlines where impatience wanted to show off. A bubble that learned humility too late. These are laid aside gently. The pile of useful shards in the corner is not a failure, it is a vocabulary for repairs. A child will someday hold one up to the sun and understand why Boo was worth learning. Later, these tiles will travel under cloth and arrive under domes that stand like bowls lifted for blessing. They will be set with line that remembers riverbeds and with hands that know how to center. Lines will meet lines and make stars that persuade the mind to rest where it usually wanders. In sunlight, the blues will become instruments. In shade, they will become lullabies. When the muezzins' call moves across a courtyard, those tiles will steady the air for the sound to cross. When a cloud passes, they will keep part of the sky for those who did not look up in time. There is a kindness in this craft that stays with the world long after the kiln goes dark. Tiles keep coolness for a foot, brightness for an eye, a corner of thought for a mind that needs a place to pause. They do not shut their maker's name. They keep the room's name safe. They age into a fine network of hairlines like the smile of an elder who has told and heard good stories before the workshop sleeps. Glazed bowls are covered, molds stacked, the floor swept with a broom that speaks softly to the dust. The kiln's mouth is propped open to dream. A single tile sits on a sill to finish cooling. Moonlight will find it later and test its surface with a silver finger. The tile will pass the test. It was made too. When you go, the road back to the domes feels shorter. You know, now, what blue had to do to become itself. Under a night sky, the city's tiles return your gaze like deep, calm water. Sleep takes this into its keeping. It lays out, in order, the steps the day taught you: knead, press, draw, paint, fire, wait, reveal. It gives your breathing the kiln's patient measure. It lets your thoughts cool slowly, without cracking. And it leaves you in the morning with a surface ready for light, strong and quiet, the color of a promise you can see.